Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens around you, I will share with you 12 ancient treasures, stories that have traveled through centuries, carried in the hearts of monks and sages who understood what you are seeking now: peace, release, the gentle dissolution of the day's weight. These are not mere tales to pass the time, but keys that unlock doors you didn't know were closed, mirrors that show you what has always been true. Let your body settle more deeply into this moment. Feel the softness beneath you, the way your shoulders can release just a little more, the way your jaw can unclench. We have time, we have all the time we need. And the first story I want to share with you takes place on a mountain path, where a young monk is learning something about the nature of burden. The morning mist still clung to the valley when the young monk began his journey down the mountain. His name was Zenshi, though names matter little in these stories. What matters is that he was like you, like me, like all of us who have ever felt the weight of yesterday pressing upon today. He walked with his shoulders curved forward, his steps heavy despite his youth, his robe seeming to pull him toward the earth with unusual force. The path he traveled wound alongside a river, and the sound of water over stones should have brought him peace. But Zenshi heard nothing except the endless conversation in his own mind, a litany of grievances, a catalogue of wounds, each one replayed and polished smooth by constant handling. There was the harsh words spoken by his fellow monk 3 winters ago. There was the dismissal from his teacher when he had offered what he thought was a profound insight. There was the laughter of the other students when he stumbled during walking meditation. There was his father's voice from childhood, saying he would never amount to anything. On and on, each memory a stone he carried. What Zenshi did not realize, what none of us realize at first, is that he had been literally collecting these stones. Each time he walked by the river, each time a resentment surfaced in his mind, he would bend down and select a river stone, smooth and heavy, and place it in the deep pockets of his robes. 1 stone for each grievance, 1 stone for each time he had been wronged, overlooked, misunderstood, or hurt. He had been doing this for so long that he no longer noticed the action itself. It had become as automatic as breathing. By the time his master, old Master Kenzo, encountered him on the path that morning, Zenshi's robes hung low with the weight of perhaps 30 or 40 stones. His pockets bulged. His walk had become a shuffle. And yet, if you had asked him directly, "Why do you walk so burdened?" he would have looked at you in confusion, unaware of what he carried. Master Kenzo was returning from the village with nothing but a small bundle of rice and vegetables. He was old, so old that the other monks whispered he must be nearly 90. Yet he walked with the lightness of a child, his feet barely seeming to touch the earth. When he saw Zenshi struggling up the path, he stopped and waited, his face peaceful, his eyes holding that particular quality of seeing that comes from decades of meditation. "Zenshi," he said softly when the young monk finally reached him, "why do you bow so low this morning? Are you looking for something on the ground?" Zenshi straightened slightly, surprised. "No, master. I am simply walking." "Ah," said Kenzo. "But you walk as if carrying a great weight. What burden do you bear?" And here something shifted in Zenshi. Perhaps it was the kindness in his master's voice. Perhaps it was simply that he had never been asked this question so directly. He stopped walking. He stood very still. And then, slowly, he began to reach into his pockets. "This one," he said, pulling out a dark grey stone, "is from when Brother Takashi said my calligraphy looked like chicken scratches. This one, another stone, this one, pale and veined with white, is from when you did not choose me to ring the temple bell, though I had practiced for months. This one is from when my mother said I was foolish to become a monk. This one is from when I was 7 and the other children would not let me play. This one is from when I offered to help in the kitchen and was told I would only be in the way." On and on he went, and with each stone, a story. With each story, a wound that had never healed because he had never allowed it to. He had kept each one fresh, had taken it out and examined it regularly, had polished it with his attention until it gleamed with a terrible clarity. Master Kenzo listened without interruption, his face showing neither approval nor disapproval, merely that deep attention that is itself a form of love. When Zenshi finally fell silent, his hands full of stones, his pockets still heavy with more, the master asked a simple question. "And who," he said gently, "makes you carry them still?" The words fell into Zenshi's consciousness like a pebble into a still pond, and the ripples spread outward, touching everything. Who makes you carry them still? Not who wronged you that was in the past, finished, gone like last year's snow, but who keeps these stones in your pocket, who reaches down each day to pick up another, who holds on to each slight, each disappointment, each hurt, as if it were a treasure too precious to release. Zenshi looked down at his hands, at the stones he held. He looked at his master, whose own hands were empty, whose step was light, who had certainly experienced his own share of life's difficulties, yet carried none of them. And in that moment, something ancient and wise within Zenshi, the same wisdom that lives in you, in all of us, understood. "I do," he whispered. "I make myself carry them." Master Kenzo smiled, and it was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "Just so," he said, "just so. And tell me, Zenshi, do these stones make you wise? Do they make you kind? Do they help you serve others or find peace?" Zenshi shook his head slowly. "No, master. They make me bitter. They make me walk hunched over. They make me see new insults everywhere because I am already full of old ones. They make me small." "Then perhaps," said the master, "it is time to put them down." And there, on the mountain path beside the river that had worn these very stones smooth over countless years, Zenshi began to release them. One by one, he threw them into the water. Some he hurled with force, as if throwing away the anger itself. Others he placed gently, with a kind of sad farewell to the pain he had held so close. With each stone that left his hands, he felt lighter. With each splash, he felt his shoulders rise a little, his spine straighten. The Buddha himself once said, "Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." Zenshi understood this now in his bones, in his hands that were finally empty, in his heart that had been scorched by coals he had refused to release. When the last stone disappeared beneath the surface of the river, Zenshi stood differently. He stood taller. He stood the way he had stood as a child, before he learned to collect grievances, before he understood that the world could hurt him and that he could hold on to that hurt like a possession. "Master," he said, and his voice was wondering, "I feel so light, as if I could fly." "Yes," said Kenzo, "this is what the beginner's mind feels like. This is what it is to be free. And Zenshi, listen carefully now. Tomorrow you may find yourself bending down to pick up another stone. Someone will say something thoughtless. Someone will overlook you. Life will offer you 1,000 new stones to carry. But now you know the truth. Now you know that you can choose. You can pick up the stone, or you can leave it where it lies. You can carry the burden, or you can walk on, light and free." They walked together back up the mountain then, the old master and the young monk, and their footsteps were equally light upon the earth. And if you had seen them from a distance, you might not have been able to tell which was which, for in that moment they both walked with the freedom that comes from empty hands and an unburdened heart. As those stones sink beneath the water's surface, as the river continues its ancient journey toward the sea, let yourself feel the weight of what you carry, not to judge it, not to feel shame for the stones you have collected. We all have them, every one of us, but simply to notice, what would it feel like to release just one? What would it feel like to unburden yourself, even slightly? You do not have to do it now. You do not have to do anything at all. But the possibility is there, like a door you had forgotten existed, quietly waiting for the moment you choose to walk through. Let your breath deepen. Let your body settle more fully. The stones are heavy, yes, but you are not required to carry them. You never were. As we leave that mountain path, as those stones settle into the riverbed where they will rest for centuries, Let me tell you of another kind of weight we carry. Not the weight of old grievances, but the weight of everything we think we know. This is a different burden, more subtle, harder to see. It is the weight of certainty, of expertise, of the mind so filled with its own knowledge that nothing new can enter. And nowhere was this illustrated more clearly than in a simple tea room in Japan, over a century ago, where a very learned man was about to receive a teaching he would never forget. The man's name has been lost to time, though some say he was a professor, others a philosopher. What matters is that he had read everything. His library contained thousands of volumes on Buddhism, on Zen, on meditation and enlightenment. He could quote sutras from memory. He could debate the finest points of doctrine. He had spent decades studying the words of masters, the commentaries on commentaries, the scholarly arguments that had accumulated like sediment over centuries of Buddhist thought. He knew, or thought he knew, nearly everything there was to know about Zen. And yet, something bothered him. Despite all his knowledge, despite his ability to speak eloquently about emptiness and non-attachment and the nature of mind, he had never experienced the direct taste of awakening. It was like reading recipes without ever tasting food, like studying maps of countries he had never visited. The words were there, but the reality they pointed to remained elusive, always just beyond his grasp. So he decided to visit a true Zen master, a man named Nan, who lived simply in a small temple on the outskirts of the city. Nan was known for his direct teaching style, for cutting through pretense with the precision of a sword. People said that to sit with him was to see yourself reflected with uncomfortable clarity. But the scholar was confident. Surely, he thought, when Master Nan realizes how much I already understand, how deeply I have studied, he will recognize me as nearly his equal. Perhaps there are just one or two small points I need to clarify, and then I too will be enlightened. He arrived at the temple on a spring afternoon when the cherry blossoms were just beginning to fall. The temple was modest, almost plain, with none of the grandeur the scholar expected. He was shown to a simple room where Master Nan sat waiting, a small table between them set with a teapot and 2 cups. The master was older than the scholar had imagined, his face deeply lined, his movements slow and deliberate. But his eyes were extraordinary, bright, clear, utterly present, like still water reflecting the sky. The scholar bowed, though not as deeply as he might have. After all, he was an educated man, a respected authority in his field. He sat across from Master Nan and immediately began to speak. He spoke about his studies, about the sutras he had mastered, about his understanding of the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra. He quoted Dogen and Hakuin. He explained his theories about the nature of consciousness. He shared his insights into the relationship between form and emptiness. Master Nan listened in silence, his face peaceful, occasionally nodding. After several minutes of the scholar's discourse, the master reached for the teapot. It was a beautiful pot, simple and elegant, the kind that had been used in tea ceremonies for generations. He lifted it and began to pour tea into the scholar's cup. The scholar continued talking, barely pausing to notice. He was explaining now his understanding of Mu, the famous response that Master Zhao Zhao gave when asked if a dog has Buddha nature. The tea rose in the cup, approaching the rim. Still the master poured. The scholar's words flowed on. He was deep into an analysis of koan practice, comparing various interpretations he had read. The tea reached the brim of the cup, and still Master Nan poured. The hot tea spilled over the edge, ran across the table and steaming rivulets began to drip onto the floor. The scholar's voice faltered. He watched in confusion as the master continued to pour, the tea overflowing, pooling on the wooden table, cascading over the edge. "Master!" the scholar finally exclaimed, unable to contain himself any longer. "The cup is full. No more will go in. Can't you see it's overflowing?" Master Nan set down the teapot. He looked at the scholar with those clear, penetrating eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm, like a bell struck once in the silence. "Like this cup," he said, "you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The words hung in the air, The tea continued to drip from the table to the floor, each drop marking a moment of time. And in that moment, something cracked in the scholar's carefully constructed edifice of knowledge. He saw himself suddenly as the master must see him. A man so stuffed with concepts, so bloated with theories, so filled with second-hand understanding that there was no room for direct experience. He had come seeking teaching, but had left no space to receive it. He had come asking questions, but knew all the answers already, or thought he did. The Buddha himself taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. The scholar had become his thoughts, his theories, his accumulated knowledge. He had confused the menu for the meal, the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. He had built a house of words and lived in it, thinking it was reality. Master Nanan let the silence extend. The tea stopped dripping. Somewhere outside, a bird called. The scholar sat very still, feeling something he had not felt in years, the discomfort of not knowing, the vertigo of uncertainty. It was terrifying. It was also somehow a relief. "Master," he said quietly, all his earlier confidence gone, "I understand. I have been a fool. All these years of study, and I have learned nothing but words. What must I do?" Nanan smiled, and it was a smile of great compassion. "First," he said, "we must empty the cup. Not the cup on the table that one will empty itself, but the cup of your mind. This is not done by acquiring more knowledge. It is done by releasing what you think you know. It is done by approaching each moment with what we call beginner's mind, the mind that is open, eager, empty of preconceptions." "But how?" asked the scholar. "How do I empty decades of learning?" "You do not throw it away," said the master. "Knowledge has its place, but you must hold it lightly, like water in an open hand. The moment you grasp it too tightly, it leaks away, and you are left holding nothing but the memory of wetness. Come, let me pour you fresh tea. This time, let us empty the cup first." He picked up the scholar's cup, now full to overflowing, and poured its contents into a basin. The cup was empty, clean, ready to receive. Then, slowly, with great attention, he poured fresh tea. This time the scholar watched in silence. He watched the steam rise. He watched the golden green liquid fill the cup. He watched the master's hands steady and sure. And for the first time in many years, he was not thinking about Buddhism or Zen or enlightenment. He was simply watching tea being poured. "Now," said Master Nanan, "drink." The scholar lifted the cup. He had drunk tea thousands of times, had even studied the tea ceremony, had read treatises on the spiritual significance of tea. But he had never actually tasted tea. Not really, not with his full attention. Now he did. The warmth of the cup in his hands, the slight bitterness on his tongue, the way the tea seemed to spread its warmth through his body. It was ordinary, it was extraordinary. It was completely itself, requiring no commentary, no explanation, no theory. "This," said the master, "is beginner's mind. Each sip as if for the first time, each moment fresh, unconditioned by the past." Shunryu Suzuki, who would come after us and teach in America, would say, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few. You came here as an expert, but expertise, when it hardens into certainty, becomes a prison." The scholar sat with this. He thought of all the times he had dismissed other interpretations because they did not match his understanding. All the times he had stopped listening because he already knew what would be said. All the moments of life he had missed because he was busy categorizing, analyzing, comparing to what he had read in books. Dogen Zenji taught, the master continued, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. You have studied the Buddha way through books. Now you must study it through direct experience. And to do this, you must forget everything you think you know, at least temporarily. You must become like a cup that is empty, ready to be filled. The scholar stayed with Master Nanan for many months after that first meeting. Each day he practiced sitting meditation, and each day he discovered new layers of knowledge he had to release. It was not easy. The mind does not give up its certainties without a struggle. There were days when he felt utterly lost, adrift without his familiar references and concepts. There were days when he wanted to return to his books, to the comfortable world of ideas. But slowly, gradually, something shifted. The moments of beginner's mind became more frequent. He would see a flower and just see it, without immediately thinking of all he had read about flowers as symbols of impermanence. He would hear the rain and just hear it, without classifying it as pleasant or unpleasant. He would sit in meditation, and sometimes, just sometimes, the endless commentary in his mind would pause, and there would be just sitting, just breathing, just being. One morning, many months later, the master was again pouring tea. The scholar watched, present, attentive. When the cup was full, the master stopped pouring. The scholar smiled. "You have learned," said Master Nanin. "I have unlearned," replied the scholar. "Same thing," said the master, and they both laughed. The scholar eventually returned to his studies, but he was different now. He read with an open hand instead of a clenched fist. He held his knowledge lightly, always willing to set it down, always ready to see something new. He had learned that wisdom is not the accumulation of knowledge, but the ability to meet each moment with freshness, with presence, with an empty cup ready to receive what is actually here, rather than what we think should be here. And sometimes, what we must empty is not just knowledge or opinions, but worry itself. The endless anxious churning of the mind that tries to control what cannot be controlled. This brings me to another story, one about a farmer who understood something very deep about the nature of good and bad fortune. There was once a farmer who lived at the edge of a village, in a land where the mountains meet the plains. His farm was modest. A small plot of land, a simple house with a thatched roof, a vegetable garden, and one horse. Just one horse, but a good one, strong and healthy, worth more than everything else the farmer owned combined. In that time and place, a horse meant the difference between prosperity and poverty. With a horse, you could plow your fields efficiently, carry your goods to market, travel to distant places. Without a horse, life became immeasurably harder. The farmer's name was Wei. Though again, names are merely convenient labels we hang on the truth. What mattered was not his name, but his way of seeing, his particular relationship with the rising and falling tides of fortune that touch all our lives. He was not young, perhaps 50, perhaps 60, his face weathered by sun and wind, his hands strong from decades of work. He lived alone, his wife having died some years before, his son grown and living in the capital city, seeking fortune in ways his father could not understand. One morning, Wei went to the stable to prepare his horse for the day's work, and the stable was empty. The gate stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The horse was gone. He searched the nearby fields, called out, walked the perimeter of his land, but there was no sign of the animal. It had simply vanished in the night, perhaps frightened by something, perhaps lured away by the scent of wild horses in the distant hills. By mid-morning, the neighbors had heard the news. They came to Wei's fence, shaking their heads in sympathy, their faces long with shared sorrow. "What terrible luck," said one, a woman who kept chickens. "How unfortunate," said another, a man who grew rice in the paddies. "What will you do without your horse?" asked a third. "This is such bad fortune." They gathered around him, offering their condolences as if someone had died. And indeed, in a sense, something had died: his prosperity, his security, his primary means of working the land. Any reasonable person would have been distraught. Any normal person would have cursed the fates, would have raged against this injustice. But Wei simply listened to their expressions of sympathy, nodded politely, and said, "Maybe, maybe not, we'll see." The neighbors looked at each other in confusion. What did he mean, "we'll see"? The horse was gone. This was obviously bad luck. There was nothing to see. But Wei offered no further explanation, just returned to his work, hoeing his garden by hand, doing what could be done without the horse. The neighbors went away shaking their heads, muttering that perhaps the loss had unbalanced the old farmer's mind. A week passed. Then another. Wei worked his land as best he could, doing manually what the horse had made easy. He did not complain. He did not despair. He simply continued, meeting each day as it came. Then, one morning just after dawn, Wei heard a sound he knew well, the neighing of horses. He went outside and stopped in wonder. There, in his field, was his horse. But the horse had not returned alone. Behind it were 7 wild horses, magnificent creatures with flowing manes, powerful and untamed. His horse had found a wild herd in the mountains and had led them back, perhaps seeking the comfort of the stable it knew, perhaps for reasons horses understand, but humans cannot fathom. By afternoon, the neighbors had gathered again at Wei's fence. Their faces were bright now with excitement and congratulation. "What amazing luck," they exclaimed. "You are blessed by heaven," they said. 1 horse lost, 8 horses gained. "What wonderful fortune," they cried. They celebrated with him, certain that his fortunes had turned, that he had been specially favored by fate. Wei listened, smiled gently, and said, "Maybe, maybe not. We'll see." Again, the neighbors looked at each other in bewilderment. How could this not be good fortune? He now had 8 horses, when before he had only 1. He was suddenly a wealthy man by village standards. But Wei simply offered them tea and said nothing more. The farmer's son, hearing news of the wild horses, travelled from the capital to visit. He was a young man of 25, strong and ambitious, eager to help his father tame and train these valuable animals. For several days, father and son worked together, and it was good to have the young man home, even if Wei sensed his son's restlessness, his impatience with the slow rhythms of farm life. The son was particularly drawn to one of the wild horses, a large stallion with a coat like midnight. He was determined to break it, to ride it. Wei cautioned him. The horse was wild, unpredictable, perhaps too much for even a skilled rider. But the young man had the confidence of youth. He had ridden horses in the capital. How different could this be? On the 4th day, the son climbed onto the wild stallion's back. For a few moments, everything seemed well. Then the horse reared, twisted, bucked with explosive force. The son was thrown, landing badly, his leg twisted beneath him. The crack of breaking bone was audible even from where Wei stood. The young man cried out in pain, and the wild horse galloped away to join its fellows. The neighbors, who seemed to spend much of their time monitoring Wei's changing fortunes, gathered once more at the fence. Their faces were grave, their voices hushed with sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "Your son's leg, broken so badly, how unfortunate," they murmured. "First good fortune, now bad fortune. The wheel turns so quickly," they observed. Wei sat beside his son, who lay on a mat inside the house, his legs splintered and bandaged. The young man was in pain but would heal. The bone would knit, though it would take many weeks. Wei looked up at his neighbors and said, quietly and without emotion, "Maybe, maybe not. We'll see." The neighbors had stopped being surprised by his responses, but they still did not understand them. A broken leg was clearly bad fortune. There was no ambiguity here. The old farmer, they decided, was simply strange, perhaps even simple-minded, unable to recognize obvious good and bad when it appeared. A month passed. The son's leg began to heal, though slowly. He could not yet walk, could certainly not return to the capital. He lay in his father's house, frustrated by his immobility, worried about his position in the city, anxious about the life he was missing. Then, one morning, the sound of drums and marching feet echoed through the village. The imperial army had arrived. War had broken out on the northern border, and the emperor required soldiers. Every able-bodied young man in the village was to be conscripted immediately. The army moved from house to house, and from each house came weeping mothers losing sons, wives losing husbands, young men torn from their lives to fight in a war that might kill them, that would certainly change them forever. The soldiers came to Wei's house. They found the son lying on his mat, his legs still splintered, unable to stand without help. The commanding officer shook his head. "This one cannot fight," he said. "Leave him." And they moved on to the next house. When the army had taken all the young men and marched away, leaving the village full of grief and fear, the neighbors came once more to Wei's fence. Their faces were complicated, now marked by their own losses. by the strange recognition that what had seemed like terrible luck had perhaps saved the farmer's son from a worse fate. "Your son's broken leg," said one woman, her own son now marching north toward war. "Perhaps it was good fortune after all." "He alone remains," said an old man whose grandson had been taken. "Fate has protected him." They looked at Wei, waiting for his response, expecting finally to hear him agree that yes, this was good fortune, that the broken leg had been a blessing in disguise. Wei looked at his neighbors with eyes full of compassion for their losses. He looked at his son, alive and healing inside the house. He looked at the road down which the army had marched, carrying the village's young men toward an uncertain future. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe not. We'll see." This story has been told for thousands of years, passed down through generations, retold in different lands with different details, but always the same essential truth. It comes from the ancient Taoist tradition, though it has been adopted by Zen teachers as well, for it illustrates something profound about the nature of judgment, the impossibility of knowing what is truly good or bad when we can only see a small piece of the larger pattern. The Buddha taught, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." Wei understood this. He did not cling to the good fortune, did not despair at the bad fortune. He met each moment as it arrived, without the layer of judgment that causes so much of our suffering. We spend our lives in constant evaluation, labeling everything that happens as good or bad, fortune or misfortune, blessing or curse. We celebrate what we call good luck and mourn what we call bad luck. But Wei saw what most of us miss, that each event is connected to the next in ways we cannot predict or control. The lost horse brings wild horses. The wild horses lead to a broken leg. The broken leg saves a life. And what will that saved life lead to? We don't know. We can never know. We can only see the immediate moment, the single link in a chain that extends infinitely in both directions. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Zen master who would teach many centuries after Wei, said, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. Not the past, which is gone like water that has flowed downstream. Not the future, which exists only in our imagination. Just this moment, just this breath, just this reality, as it actually is, not as we wish it to be or fear it might become." What if you could hold your own life the way Wei held his? What if you could meet both the good and the bad with the same equanimity, the same patience? We'll see. This does not mean not caring. Wei cared about his son, cared about his neighbors, cared about his life. But he did not add to his experience the extra layer of judgment and story that turns pain into suffering, that turns temporary difficulty into permanent catastrophe. Tonight, as you settle into rest, what have you labeled as bad fortune in your own life? What have you decided is terrible luck? And what if, like Wei, you could hold that judgment more lightly, not denying the pain or difficulty, not pretending that hard things are easy, but simply remaining open to the possibility that you cannot yet see the whole picture, that the story is not finished, that what seems like an ending might be a beginning. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. These words are not indifference. They are wisdom. They are the recognition that life is larger than our judgments, more complex than our categories of good and bad. They are an invitation to remain present, to stay open, to meet what comes without the armor of our certainty about what it means. The farmer Wei eventually grew old, as all of us do. His son's leg healed, and the young man did return to the capital, but he was changed. He had learned something from his father during those months of healing, not through lectures or teachings, but through watching the old man meet each day with presence and peace. And when the son had children of his own, he told them about their grandfather, about the horse that ran away and returned, about the broken leg that saved a life, about the simple phrase that contained an ocean of wisdom. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Let your breath deepen now. Feel how your body continues to release, to soften, to settle. The day that is ending brought its own mixture of what you might call good and bad, but perhaps, for tonight, you can simply let it be what it was. just experience, just life unfolding, beyond your ability to finally judge as blessing or curse. And this understanding of time, this recognition that we cannot know the meaning of events while we are still inside them, brings us to a garden where past and future dissolve entirely, where there is only the season that is here now, the flower that blooms today, the leaf that falls in this very moment. In the mountains of southern Japan, there stood a temple so old that no one could remember when it was first built. The wooden beams had been replaced countless times, the roof rethatched through hundreds of seasons, yet something of the original spirit remained, like a scent that lingers long after the flower has faded. And at this temple, for 50 years, the same man had tended the garden. His name was Kenji, and when he first came to the temple, he had been a young monk of 20, uncertain of his path, restless in his meditation, filled with questions about enlightenment and awakening. Now he was 70, his back bent from decades of work, his hands gnarled like the roots of the ancient pine trees he had cared for all these years. But his face held a peace that the young monk had never known as settledness, a quality of being perfectly at home in whatever moment he inhabited. The garden itself was not large, perhaps the size of a modest house, but it contained multitudes. There were cherry trees that exploded into pink clouds each spring. There were maples that burned red and gold each autumn. There was a small pond where koi fish circled lazily, their orange and white bodies flashing beneath the surface. There were carefully placed stones, each one selected and positioned with the kind of attention most people reserve for momentous decisions. There were moss-covered paths, bamboo groves, a small waterfall that sang its constant song. It was the kind of garden that people travelled great distances to see, though Kenji himself never thought of it as special. It was simply his garden, the place where he spent his days, the ground that had taught him everything worth knowing. On a crisp autumn morning, when the maples were just beginning to turn and the air carried that particular clarity that comes before winter, a visitor arrived at the temple. He was a young businessman from Tokyo, successful and wealthy, but troubled in the way that successful, wealthy people often are haunted by a sense that something essential was missing, that he had climbed the ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. He had come seeking wisdom, seeking peace, seeking something he could not quite name. After speaking briefly with the abbot, he was directed to the garden where Kenji was working. The old gardener was raking leaves, moving with a slowness that seemed almost meditative, each stroke of the rake deliberate and complete. The visitor watched for a moment, then approached, bowing respectfully. "Excuse me, honored elder, I was told you might speak with me. I have questions about finding peace, about living a meaningful life." Kenji paused in his raking, leaned on the tool, and studied the young man with eyes that were both kind and penetrating. "Questions are good," he said, "but first, help me with these leaves. We can talk while we work." The visitor hesitated. He had not come to do manual labor, but something in the old man's gaze made refusal impossible. He removed his expensive jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and picked up a rake. They worked in silence for a while, the young man clumsy and impatient, wanting to get to the conversation, to the wisdom he had come seeking. Kenji worked steadily, his movements economical, almost graceful despite his age. Finally, the visitor could no longer contain his questions. "Master Kenji," he said. Though Kenji had never claimed the title of master, "How do you find peace? My life feels like a constant struggle. I am always anxious about the future, always regretting the past. I am never satisfied with what I have. I achieve one goal only to feel empty and immediately set another. How do I find contentment?" Kenji continued raking, gathering a pile of crimson and gold leaves. "Tell me," he said, "what is your favorite season?" The question seemed so far from what they had been discussing that the visitor was momentarily confused. "My favorite season? I suppose spring." "Yes, spring. Everything is fresh and new. The cherry blossoms are beautiful. The world feels full of possibility." "Ah," said Kenji, "spring is wonderful. And what about summer? Do you like summer?" "Summer is too hot," the visitor said. "I find it oppressive. I spend most of it in air-conditioned buildings." "I see. And autumn? Autumn is melancholy. Everything is dying. The days grow short. It makes me think of endings, of time passing. And winter? Winter is worst of all. Cold, dark, everything dead. I hate winter. I usually travel somewhere warm if I can. Kenji nodded, saying nothing. He gathered his pile of leaves and carried them to the compost area. The visitor followed, waiting for the old man to explain the relevance of these questions. Finally, Kenji spoke. I have tended this garden for 50 years. People often ask me, as you just did, which season I love most. And I always give the same answer: I love the season that is here now. He gestured around them at the autumn garden, at the maples burning in the sunlight, at the last few flowers clinging to their stems, at the leaves drifting down like colored snow. Right now, autumn is here. So autumn is my favorite season. In winter, when the snow covers these stones and the branches are bare against the sky, winter will be my favorite. In spring, when the cherry blossoms open for their brief, perfect moment, spring will be my favorite. In summer, when everything is green and full and the cicadas sing, summer will be my favorite. The visitor frowned, trying to understand. But surely you must prefer one season over the others? Surely spring with its beauty is better than winter with its harshness? Kenji smiled, a smile of such gentleness that it was almost like being touched. Come, he said, let me show you something. He led the visitor to the cherry tree, its branches now carrying only leaves, the blossoms long since fallen. In April, this tree gives me clouds of pink flowers. People come from distant cities to see it bloom. They take photographs, they write poems. The blossoms last perhaps 2 weeks, and then they fall like snow. Is this sad? Should I wish they would last longer? It does seem sad that such beauty is so brief, the visitor said. And yet, Kenji continued, if the blossoms lasted all year, would they be beautiful? Would people travel to see them? It is precisely because they are brief that they are precious. The cherry blossom teaches us about impermanence, about the beauty of things that do not last. And look now, the tree gives me these leaves, this green shade. In autumn, it will give me colors like fire. In winter, it will give me the stark beauty of bare branches against snow. Each season, the tree gives me exactly what it has to give. Each season is complete. Each season is perfect in itself. They walked together through the garden, and Kenji pointed out other lessons. See this pond? In summer, the water lilies bloom, and the surface is covered with flowers. Now, in autumn, the lilies are gone. But look, the water is clear as glass, reflecting the maples, reflecting the sky. Each has its own beauty, neither is better or worse. They are simply different faces of the same truth. But what is that truth? The visitor asked. That truth is this, Kenji said, stopping and turning to face the young man fully. That this moment, exactly as it is enough. It is complete. It lacks nothing. You spend your energy wishing for spring when autumn is here, wishing for future success when present success surrounds you, wishing you were somewhere else, someone else, someone else. But where are you when you do this? You are nowhere. You are in a fantasy, a dream of the future, or a memory of the past. You are not here. You are not alive to the only moment you actually have. The Buddha himself taught, the secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, not to worry about the future, but to live the present moment wisely and earnestly. Kenji had learned this lesson not from books or sutras, but from the garden itself, from 50 years of meeting each season as it came, each day as it arrived. But how? The visitor asked, and there was almost desperation in his voice. How do you stay present? How do you not worry about the future, not regret the past? I garden, Kenji said simply. When I rake leaves, I rake leaves. When I trim branches, I trim branches. When I sit and watch the koi swim, I sit and watch the koi swim. I do not rake leaves while thinking about trimming branches. I do not watch the koi while regretting the past or planning the future. I am here, doing this, now. That is all. He picked up his rake again and began to work, and the visitor watched him, beginning to understand. Each stroke of the rake was complete in itself. Kenji was not raking in order to finish, in order to move on to something else. He was simply raking, fully present to the sound of the rake through leaves, the smell of autumn air, the play of light through the maple branches. Hakuin, a great Zen master, once asked, "At this moment, is there anything lacking?" Kenji said softly, still raking. This is a koan, a question for meditation. At this moment, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but right now, is there anything lacking? And if you are fully present, if you are truly here, the answer is always no, nothing is lacking. This moment is complete. They worked together for the rest of the morning, and gradually the visitor began to feel something shift. When his mind wandered to the meeting he had next week, he brought it back to the rake, to the leaves, to the present task. When he started to replay an argument he'd had with his wife, he noticed the thought and returned to the sensation of his feet on the ground, the cool air on his skin, the work in his hands. By afternoon, something had quieted in him. He felt tired in a good way, the kind of tiredness that comes from physical work done with attention. He felt more settled than he had in years. As the sun began to lower, painting the garden in golden light, they stopped to rest. Kenji made tea, simple green tea in clay cups, and they sat on a stone bench overlooking the pond. "The garden has taught me everything I know," Kenji said. "It has taught me about impermanence. Nothing stays the same. Everything changes, and this is not sad, but simply true. It has taught me about patience. You cannot force a flower to bloom before its time. It has taught me about attention. Each small task, done with care, is important. It has taught me about acceptance. You cannot make spring come in winter, cannot make rain fall when the sky is clear. You can only work with what is, not with what you wish were." The visitor sipped his tea, tasting it, really tasting it perhaps for the first time in his life. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have been living everywhere except where I actually am. I am always in the future, planning, worrying, striving, or in the past, regretting, replaying, wishing I had done things differently, but I am never here." "Yes," Kenji said, "this is the human condition. This is why we suffer. But it is also why practice is possible. Each moment is a new opportunity to return, to come back to here, to now. You will wander away again, everyone does, but you can always return. This is the practice." The great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who would live in a later century, would express the same truth. The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. Not the past, which is gone, not the future, which has not arrived. Only now, only here, only this. As the visitor prepared to leave, the sun setting behind the mountains, he bowed deeply to Kenji. "Thank you, Master. You have given me more than I came seeking." Kenji bowed in return. "I have given you nothing," he said. "The garden gave. I only showed you what was already here. Come again in winter if you can. The garden will teach you different lessons then. Each season has its own gifts." The visitor did return many times over the years that followed. He came in winter and saw the beauty of bare branches and snow. He came in spring and watched the cherry blossoms open and fall. He came in summer and sat in green shade while cicadas sang. And each time Kenji was there, a little older, a little more bent, but always present, always tending, always loving the season that was here now. And one spring, when the visitor arrived, he learned that Kenji had died just days before, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. The visitor wept, standing in the garden that had been Kenji's life's work. But even in his grief, he understood that the old gardener had given him a final teaching. Kenji had loved each season while it was here, and then had released it when it passed. He had lived fully in each moment, and then had let go when his own season came to an end. The garden remained, tended now by younger hands, still teaching its lessons to anyone who would listen. Still showing that each moment is complete, that nothing is lacking, that the season that is here now is always, always enough. Let your breath deepen now as you rest. What season of life are you in? Not what season do you wish for, but what season is actually here? Can you, even for this moment, love what is rather than what might be? Can you be here, in this breath, in this darkness, in this sweet release into rest? The garden teaches that everything passes, and this is not a tragedy, but a truth. Your worries will pass, your joys will pass. This day has passed, and tomorrow will come whether you spend tonight worrying about it or resting in peace. Choose peace. Choose now. Choose to be here, loving the season that is here, which is always, always this one. And speaking of seasons changing, of the truth that everything passes, let me tell you now about a woman who learned that grief itself is something we all share. There was a woman named Kisa Gotami who lived in a village in ancient India in the time when the Buddha himself still walked the earth. She was young, perhaps 25, and until recently her life had been ordinary in the way that lives are ordinary, a mixture of small joys and small sorrows, of daily tasks and simple pleasures. She had married young, as was the custom, and though her marriage had not been born of passionate love, it had grown into something comfortable, something good. And then, 3 years into her marriage, she had given birth to a son. The child had transformed everything. Kisa Gotami, who had been somewhat overlooked in her husband's household, somewhat invisible among the other women, suddenly became important. She was the mother of a son. She had fulfilled her purpose, had given the family its future. But more than that, far more than that, she had fallen in love with this tiny being in a way she had not known was possible. She loved him with a fierceness that frightened her, loved him with every fibre of her being. When he smiled, her heart expanded until she thought it might burst. When he cried, she felt his pain as her own. He was everything. The boy grew. He learned to crawl, then to walk, then to run on sturdy legs through the dusty streets of the village. He learned to speak, calling her Mama, in a voice that made her believe in the divine. He was healthy, bright, curious about everything. Kisa Gotami thought herself the most fortunate of women. When the other mothers complained about their children, she said nothing, just smiled and held her son close, breathing in the sweet smell of his hair, feeling the warm weight of him in her arms. He was 2 years old when the fever came. It started so suddenly one morning. He was playing, laughing, reaching for butterflies in the garden. By afternoon he was burning hot, his small body shaking. Kisa Gotami did everything she knew to do. She bathed him in cool water. She gave him herbs the old woman recommended. She prayed to every god whose name she knew. For 3 days the fever raged, and on the 4th day, just as the sun was rising, her son died in her arms. The grief that consumed her was beyond anything she had imagined possible. It was not sadness. Sadness was too small a word for this. It was a tearing, a ripping apart, as if her own heart had been pulled from her chest. She could not eat, she could not sleep, she could barely breathe. She held her son's body and would not let go, would not accept what had happened. This could not be real. This could not be the truth. Her son could not be gone. She refused to allow the burial. She carried her dead child through the village, knocking on doors, begging for medicine, for help, for someone to tell her this was a mistake, that her son would wake up. The villagers looked at her with pity and fear. Some tried to comfort her. Others turned away, disturbed by the sight of her wild grief, her refusal to accept what was so clearly true. Someone she could not remember who told her that there was a holy man teaching in the grove outside the village, a man called the Buddha, the awakened one. He was said to be wise beyond measure, compassionate beyond understanding. Perhaps he could help. Kisa Gotami stumbled toward the grove, still carrying her son's body. She found the Buddha sitting beneath a great tree, surrounded by his disciples, teaching. When he saw her approach, he stopped speaking. The crowd parted. She fell at his feet, sobbing. "Please," she gasped, "please help my son. They say you are wise, that you can perform miracles. Please, I beg you, bring him back to me. He is all I have. He is everything." The Buddha looked at her with eyes that contained such compassion that, for a moment, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time since her son had died. He did not tell her that her son was gone, that she must accept this. He did not offer platitudes about the will of the gods. Instead, he said something unexpected. "I can help you," he said gently, But first, you must do something for me. Go into the village and bring me a mustard seed from a household that has never known death. Just one mustard seed from a house where no one has ever died. Bring this to me, and I will help your son." Hope blazed in Kisa Gotami's heart. A mustard seed, such a small thing, such a common thing. Every household had mustard seeds. She would find one quickly in return, and the Buddha would bring her son back to life. She bowed deeply and hurried back to the village. She went to the first house, knocked on the door. When the woman answered, Kisa Gotami said, "Please, I need a mustard seed, but it must come from a household that has never known death. Has anyone in your family ever died?" The woman's face softened with understanding and sorrow. "Oh, my dear," she said, "only last year we lost my husband's mother, and before that, his younger brother died of illness. We have known much death in this house." Kisa Gotami thanked her and moved to the next house. There, she found a family who had lost a daughter in childbirth. At the next house, a father had died in an accident. At the house after that, a child had died of fever, just like her son. At another, the grandmother had died peacefully in her sleep the previous winter. At yet another, the eldest son had been killed by a snake bite. She went from house to house, door to door, all through that day and into the evening. And at every single house, the answer was the same. Death had visited here. Someone had been lost. A mother, a father, a child, a grandparent, a sibling, a spouse. Some deaths had been recent, still raw and painful. Others had occurred years before, the grief now a dull ache rather than a sharp wound. But every household, every family had known death. Every family had lost someone they loved. As the sun began to set, Kisa Gotami found herself standing at the edge of the village, having visited every home, having found not a single household untouched by death, and something inside her shifted. She looked down at the small body she still carried, her son who would never again open his eyes, never again call her Mama, and she finally understood what the Buddha had been teaching her. She was not alone in her grief. Her suffering was not unique, not special, not a cruel exception to the way life should be. It was, instead, the universal human experience. Everyone loses someone. Everyone knows this tearing grief, this unbearable pain. The rich and the poor, the young and the old, the wise and the foolish. Death comes to every household, takes someone from every family. To be human is to love, and to love is, eventually, to grieve. She walked slowly back to the grove where the Buddha waited. She had left her son's body at the cremation ground, had finally allowed the funeral rites to be performed. She came to the Buddha empty-handed, her face streaked with tears, but something had changed in her eyes. "I could not find the mustard seed you asked for," she said quietly. "Every house has known death. Every family has lost someone." "Yes," said the Buddha, his voice full of compassion. "This is the truth I wanted you to discover. Not that your grief is wrong, not that your love for your son was foolish, but that you are not alone. Suffering is universal. Loss is universal. To live is to lose what we love, for everything that is born must die. This is not a punishment. It is not a failure. It is simply the nature of existence." Kisa Gotami sat down at the Buddha's feet. "I thought," she said slowly, "that my suffering was unique, that I was being singled out, punished, that the universe had turned against me specifically. But now I see that grief is the price we pay for love. We love, and so we lose. And everyone pays this price." The Buddha spoke then, and his words would echo through centuries, offering comfort to countless others who would walk the path Kisa Gotami had walked. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. She had loved her son completely, had poured all of herself into that love, and now she had to learn to let go, not because love ends, but because the form it takes must change. Her son was gone from this world, but the love she felt for him remained. That love had transformed her, had opened her heart in ways it had never been opened before. The pain of loss was the shadow cast by the light of that love. "I understand now," she said, tears still flowing, but something like peace beginning to touch her heart. "I understand that I am not being punished, I am simply being human, and that every person I passed on the street today, every person I will meet tomorrow, carries their own losses, their own griefs. We are all walking wounded, all carrying the weight of those we have loved and lost." The Buddha nodded. And this understanding, this recognition of our shared humanity, our shared suffering, this is the beginning of compassion. When you understand that everyone suffers as you suffer, that everyone loses as you have lost, you cannot help but feel compassion for them. The walls we build around our private pain begin to dissolve. We see that we are all in this together, all struggling with the same fundamental truths. Kisa Gotami stayed with the Buddha and his followers, became one of his students, and eventually became a teacher herself. She never forgot her son, how could she? The love she felt for him remained as strong as ever, but the quality of that love changed. It became less desperate, less clinging. It became a love that could hold both the joy of having had him and the sorrow of losing him, that could honor both without being destroyed by either. In later years, when people came to her with their own griefs, their own losses, she would listen with profound understanding. She knew that nothing she could say would take away their pain. Grief cannot be fixed or solved. It can only be felt, witnessed, honored. But she could offer them what the Buddha had offered her, the recognition that they were not alone, that their suffering was not unique or unusual, but part of the great river of human experience that carries us all. The great teacher Pema Chodron, who would live many centuries later in a distant land, would express the same truth in different words. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Kisa Gotami had learned this truth in the most painful way possible, by knocking on every door in the village, by hearing every family's story of loss. She had discovered that her private suffering was actually universal suffering. Her isolated grief was connected to everyone else's grief, and in that recognition, something loosened. She was still sad. Of course she was still sad. The loss of her son was real and permanent and would mark her for the rest of her life. But she was no longer alone in that sadness. She was part of a great community of grieving humans, all of whom loved, all of whom lost, all of whom somehow found a way to continue. The mustard seed the Buddha asked her to find was never really about the mustard seed at all. It was about the journey, about the knocking on doors, about the hearing of stories, about the slow realization that death is democratic, that it comes to every house, that no family is exempt. And in that recognition, painful as it was, there was also a strange kind of comfort. If everyone experiences this, then perhaps there is a way through it. If others have survived this unbearable pain, then perhaps she could survive it too. The Buddha also taught, what we think, we become. Kisa Gotami had thought she was alone in her suffering, and so she had become isolated, cut off, trapped in a private hell. But when she began to think differently, to understand her suffering as part of the larger human story, she became connected again. She became part of the world again. Her grief had not disappeared, but it had found its proper place in the larger tapestry of life. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you carry your own griefs, your own losses. Perhaps you feel alone in your pain, isolated in your suffering. But you are not alone. You have never been alone. Across this world, in every city and village, in every home and heart, others are grieving too. Others have lost what they loved. Others are learning, as Kisa Gotami learned, that love and loss are two sides of the same coin, that to have one is eventually to know the other. This is not meant to minimize your pain or to suggest that it doesn't matter because others suffer too. Your grief is real and valid and deserves to be honored. But perhaps there is some small comfort in knowing that you walk a path that countless others have walked before you, that you will not be the last to walk it, that there is a great community of the broken-hearted to which you belong, and in recognizing our shared humanity, in understanding that we are all vulnerable to loss, all acquainted with grief, we discover something paradoxical. we discover that our most private pain is also our most universal experience. We discover that the very thing that makes us feel most isolated is actually what connects us most deeply to others. We discover that compassion is born from suffering, that our wounds, when we allow them to open us rather than close us, become the doorways through which we finally see each other clearly. Let your breathing slow. Let your body sink more deeply into rest. The losses you have known are real. The people you have loved and lost are still loved, will always be loved. And somewhere, in a village in ancient India, a woman named Kisa Gotami walks from door to door, learning that she is not alone, discovering that grief is the universal language, the experience that finally teaches us that we are all of us, in this together. And this brings us to a strange truth, a paradox that only reveals itself when we stop trying to grasp it with our ordinary minds. In a monastery high in the mountains of Tibet, there lived a monk named Tenzin who had devoted his entire life to the pursuit of enlightenment. He had entered the monastery as a young boy of 7, given over by parents too poor to feed all their children. And now, at 53, he had spent 46 years in study and practice. He had memorized countless sutras, had debated philosophy with the greatest scholars, had meditated for thousands upon thousands of hours. He had performed prostrations until his forehead bore a permanent callus. He had circumambulated sacred sites. He had fasted and chanted and prayed. He had done everything the text said to do, everything his teachers had instructed. And yet enlightenment eluded him. He could feel it sometimes, like a word on the tip of his tongue, like something just beyond his peripheral vision. There were moments in meditation when he sensed he was close, when the boundaries of self seemed to dissolve, when everything appeared luminous and interconnected. But then the moment would pass, and he would find himself back in ordinary consciousness, still seeking, still striving, still Tenzin who wanted to be enlightened. This wanting had become a kind of torture. The more he pursued enlightenment, the further away it seemed. The harder he tried to let go, the tighter his grip became. He was like a person trying to fall asleep who becomes more wakeful with every attempt to relax. The very effort defeated its purpose. One morning, after a particularly frustrating meditation session in which his mind had churned with thoughts about his lack of progress, Tenzin went to see his teacher, an old Lama named Rinpoche Dorje. The Rinpoche was ancient, perhaps 90, perhaps older. No one knew for certain. His face was a landscape of wrinkles, his hands gnarled, his body frail. But his eyes held a clarity and warmth that suggested depths beyond imagining. Tenzin prostrated 3 times, as was customary, then sat before his teacher. "Rinpoche," he said, unable to keep the frustration from his voice, "I have practiced for 46 years. I have done everything the Dharma teaches. I have studied, meditated, performed every ritual. Yet I am no closer to enlightenment than when I began. What am I doing wrong? What am I missing?" Rinpoche Dorje looked at him with those clear, bright eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Tell me, Tenzin, what is enlightenment?" Tenzin began to recite from memory, from the texts he had studied. Enlightenment is the realization of the true nature of reality, the dissolution of the illusion of self, the recognition of emptiness and interdependence, the cessation of suffering through the elimination of ignorance and craving. "Stop," the Rinpoche said gently. "I did not ask you what the books say. I asked you what enlightenment is. What do you think it is?" Tenzin paused, confused. It is what I am seeking. It is awakening, liberation, the end of the cycle of suffering." "And why do you seek it?" "Because I am suffering. Because I am trapped in ignorance. Because I want to be free." "Ah," said Rinpoche Dorje, "so you want to be enlightened because you are suffering, and you think enlightenment will end your suffering. Is this correct?" "Yes, Rinpoche, that is the teaching, is it not? That enlightenment ends suffering." The old Lama smiled, a smile so full of compassion and gentle amusement that Tenzin felt something shift inside him. "Tell me, Tenzin, what is causing your suffering right now, in this moment?" Tenzin thought about this. My suffering comes from my ignorance, from my attachment to the illusion of self, from my craving for no. Rinpoche Dorje interrupted again. Not what the books say. What is causing your suffering right now, in this room, as we speak? Tenzin sat with the question, really sat with it, and suddenly the answer was so obvious he almost laughed. My suffering is coming from the fact that I am not enlightened, from the fact that I want to be enlightened and am not, from the gap between where I am and where I want to be. Yes, the Rinpoche said, his eyes sparkling. Your suffering is caused by your desire for enlightenment, by your seeking, by your wanting to be other than you are. Do you see the paradox? Tenzin felt dizzy, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. But if I stop seeking enlightenment, if I stop practicing, then I will never achieve it. I will remain ignorant forever. Rinpoche Dorje leaned forward. Let me ask you something else. Right now, in this moment, what is wrong? Not what you think should be wrong, not what might be wrong tomorrow, not what was wrong yesterday. Right now, what is actually wrong? Tenzin looked around. He was sitting in a simple room with his beloved teacher. Sunlight was streaming through the window, painting patterns on the floor. He could hear birds singing outside. His body was healthy. His breath was flowing in and out. And in this moment, in this very moment, nothing was wrong. Everything was simply as it was. Nothing is wrong, he said slowly. Right now, nothing is wrong. Exactly, said the Rinpoche, and yet you are suffering. Why? Because you are not here. You are in the future, imagining some state of enlightenment that you do not have. You are in the past, regretting the years you have wasted not achieving it. You are anywhere but here, anywhen but now. And that is the only place suffering can exist, in the gap between what is and what we think should be. A Zen master from another tradition once said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Tenzin had heard this saying many times but had never understood it. Now, suddenly, a glimmer of understanding began to dawn. Are you saying, he asked carefully, that enlightenment is not some special state I need to achieve? That it is not somewhere else? Sometime else? I am saying, Rinpoche Dorje replied, that you cannot find what you are already. You cannot achieve what is your true nature. The Buddha nature is not something you acquire through practice. It is what you are, what you have always been, what you could never not be. Your seeking it is like a fish seeking water while swimming in the ocean. Tenzin felt tears beginning to form. But if this is true, why do we practice? Why spend years in meditation, in study, in discipline? The old Lama's face softened even further. We practice not to become enlightened, but to realize we already are. We practice not to get somewhere, but to stop running away from where we already are. All spiritual practice is, ultimately, practice in being present, in being here, in accepting this moment exactly as it is. And the great joke, the cosmic joke, is that the very effort to get somewhere prevents us from realizing we are already there. He paused, letting this sink in. The Tao Te Ching teaches, in the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. You have spent 46 years acquiring knowledge, techniques, merit, spiritual accomplishments. Perhaps it is time to spend some time dropping the idea that you need to be other than you are, dropping the belief that this moment is not enough, dropping the seeking itself. But how do I drop it? Tenzin asked. And even as the words left his mouth, he heard the trap in them, the seeking for a method to stop seeking. Rinpoche Dorje laughed, a sound like bells. You see, even now you are seeking a method to stop seeking. This is the mind's great trick. It wants to turn everything into a project, a goal, something to achieve. But dropping is not something you do. It happens when you see clearly that there is nothing to acquire, nowhere to go, no one to become. It happens when you finally exhaust yourself with seeking and just stop. He gestured to the window. Look at that bird singing. Is it seeking enlightenment? Is it practicing to become a better bird? No. It is simply being fully what it is, doing fully what it does. It sings because it is a bird, and singing is what birds do. There is no gap between what it is and what it thinks it should be. That is its enlightenment, its absolute presence, its complete acceptance of its bird nature. Tenzin sat in silence, feeling something beginning to crack open inside him. All these years, he had been treating enlightenment as a destination, a prize to be won through effort and discipline. He had been running towards some imagined future state, never realizing that the running itself was the obstacle. The seeking was the hiding. The trying to get there was what kept him from seeing he had never left. The great teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj taught that wisdom is knowing you are nothing, and love is knowing you are everything. Rinpoche Dorje continued. And between these two, the nothing and the everything, your life unfolds. You are not the separate self you imagine yourself to be. That self, that Tenzin who seeks enlightenment, is a thought, a story, a construction. It has no more substance than a dream. And yet here you are, this miraculous presence, this awareness in which all experience arises. You are both nothing and everything. You are the space in which life happens, and you are life itself happening. I think, Tenzin said slowly, that I am beginning to understand, not with my mind, but with something deeper. All these years I have been trying to kill the ego, to transcend the self, to become something other than I am. But that very effort was the ego's greatest trick to convince me I needed to do something to be worthy, to be whole, to be enlightened. Yes, said the Rinpoche, the ego cannot destroy itself. The self cannot transcend itself. All it can do is pretend to, creating an endless game of spiritual seeking. But when you see clearly that there is no self to transcend, that the seeker itself is what is sought, that the question and the answer are the same, then something shifts. Not because you made it shift, but because the illusion is seen through. They sat together in silence for a long time, and in that silence, without seeking it, without trying to make it happen, Tenzin felt something release. It was not dramatic. There were no lightning bolts, no visions, no mystical experiences. It was more like taking off a heavy backpack he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. The relief was immense and also completely ordinary. He looked around the room with fresh eyes. The sunlight was still painting patterns on the floor. The birds were still singing. His breath was still flowing in and out. Nothing had changed and everything had changed. The room was the same. But he was seeing it without the filter of seeking, without the lens of inadequacy, without the burden of needing it to be different than it was. It was always here, he said, wonder in his voice. It was always here, and I was always here, and there was never anywhere to go. Rinpoche Dorje nodded, tears now flowing freely down his ancient face. Welcome home, Tenzin. Welcome to what you never left. Welcome to the present moment, which is the only enlightenment there is, ever was, or ever will be. But even as Tenzin sat in this new understanding, a question arose. Rinpoche, will this understanding last, or will I forget again and return to seeking? The old Lama smiled. You are seeking even now, seeking to hold on to this realization, to make it permanent. Do you see? The mind will always seek. That is what minds do. Thoughts will arise, doubts will come. The sense of being a separate self will return, because that too is just a thought, and thoughts come and go. But now you know the secret. You know that you can always return to this moment, to what is, to the simple presence that you are, not as an achievement, not as a state to maintain, but as your true nature that is always available, always here. So enlightenment is not a permanent state, Tenzin asked. Enlightenment is not a state at all, Rinpoche Dorje said. States come and go, experiences arise and pass. Enlightenment is what you are when all states and experiences are allowed to come and go without grasping or resisting. It is not something you have. It is what you are when you stop trying to have anything. The great sage Ramana Maharshi taught, Your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world, not because it makes you special or superior, but because it ends the illusion of separation, the belief that you are isolated, lacking, in need of something outside yourself to be complete. Tenzin stayed with his teacher for the rest of the day, not discussing philosophy or technique, just sitting together in simple presence. And he noticed something remarkable. The Rinpoche did ordinary things, drank tea, adjusted his shawl, looked out the window, made small comments about the weather. There was nothing mystical or transcendent about his behavior. He was simply, completely present to whatever was happening. When drinking tea, he drank tea. When looking out the window, he looked out the window. There was no sense of someone doing these things, trying to be spiritual, trying to maintain some enlightened state. There was just the doing itself, complete and whole and enough. As evening fell and Tenzin prepared to leave, he prostrated again before his teacher, but this time the gesture felt different. It was not the prostration of an inferior before a superior, a seeker before an enlightened master. It was the recognition of his own true nature bowing to itself, the dance of consciousness honoring its own infinite creativity. "Thank you, Rinpoche," he said, "for showing me what was always here." "I showed you nothing," the old Lama replied. "You saw what you were ready to see, and now you will forget and remember, again and again, until perhaps one day the forgetting no longer troubles you, because you know you can always return. This is the practice, not seeking enlightenment, but returning to presence, again and again and again." Tenzin walked back to his cell in the gathering darkness. The path was the same path he had walked thousands of times before. The monastery was the same monastery. He was the same Tenzin, with the same body, the same history, the same tendencies of mind. And yet everything was new because he was finally here, finally now, finally seeing without the burden of seeking to be elsewhere. As you rest tonight, perhaps you too can release the burden of seeking. Not seeking sleep, not seeking peace, not seeking to be different than you are. Simply allowing this moment to be exactly what it is. Simply resting in the presence that you already are, that you have always been, that you could never not be. The enlightenment you seek is not somewhere else. It is here. It is now. It is what is reading these words, hearing these sounds, feeling these sensations. It is what you are when you stop trying to be anything at all. And in the morning, you will wake up and chop wood and carry water just as you did before, but perhaps with a lightness, a freedom, a recognition that exactly as it is what you have been seeking all along. In a small village in ancient China, there lived two brothers who could not have been more different from each other. The elder brother, whose name was Wei, was serious and dutiful, always concerned with doing the right thing, following the proper customs, maintaining his reputation. He worked hard in the family's rice fields, saved his money carefully, married a respectable woman from a good family, and raised his children with strict discipline. He was admired in the village as a model of virtue and responsibility. The younger brother, whose name was Liang, was everything Wei was not. He was playful, irreverent, seemingly careless about propriety and reputation. He worked in the fields when he had to, but he was just as likely to be found sitting under a tree watching clouds, or playing his flute by the river, or telling jokes in the marketplace. He never married, lived simply in a small hut, and owned almost nothing. The villagers shook their heads at him, wondering how two brothers could be so different, pitying Wei for having such an irresponsible sibling. What puzzled people most was that despite their differences, the brothers were devoted to each other. Wei, for all his seriousness, never criticized Liang's unconventional life, and Liang, for all his playfulness, never mocked Wei's earnest striving. They visited each other often, shared meals, talked late into the night. Their love for each other was evident to anyone who saw them together. One year, when Wei was 50 and Liang was 45, a terrible drought struck the region. The rice fields withered, the river shrank to a trickle, food became scarce. Wei, who had always been prepared, had stored grain from previous harvests. He rationed it carefully, feeding his family, making it last. But as the drought continued month after month, even his stores began to run low. He became increasingly anxious, increasingly burdened by the responsibility of keeping his family alive. Liang, who had no stored grain, no savings, no reserves of any kind, seemed remarkably untroubled. He ate the wild roots and plants he found. He shared what little he had with whoever needed it. When people asked him how he could be so carefree in such desperate times, he would smile and say, "Worrying about tomorrow's hunger doesn't fill today's belly." One evening, Wei came to visit his brother, his face drawn with worry. "Liang," he said, "I don't know what to do. My grain stores are nearly empty. In another month, maybe 2 if we are very careful, there will be nothing left. My children will starve. My wife looks at me with fear in her eyes, waiting for me to solve this problem. But I cannot make rain fall. I cannot make rice grow in dust. I lie awake every night, consumed with anxiety about what will happen." Liang looked at his brother with compassion. "Come," he said, "let us walk together." They walked out of the village, up into the hills where a few stunted trees still clung to life. The sun was setting, painting the parched landscape in shades of gold and amber. Everything was brown and dry, yet there was a stark beauty in it, a kind of terrible purity. "Tell me, brother," Liang said as they walked, "all this worry you are carrying, has it made the rain fall?" "No," Wei said, "of course not." "Has it made your grain stores last longer?" "No. If anything, the worry makes me eat less, which weakens me for the work I must do." "Has it helped your children or comforted your wife?" Wei sighed. "No. I think it makes them more frightened, seeing me so anxious." "Then what?" Liang asked gently. "Is the worry for?" Wei stopped walking. "What do you mean? What is it for?" "I worry because there is something to worry about. The situation is dire. It would be irresponsible not to worry." "Ah," said Liang. "So you worry because you think you should worry. Because not worrying would mean you don't care, that you are irresponsible, like me." There was no bitterness in his voice, only gentle amusement. "I didn't mean," Wei began, but Liang waved his hand. "It's all right. I know how the village sees me. The irresponsible one. The fool who doesn't plan, who doesn't worry about the future. But let me ask you something. In this moment, right now, are you hungry?" "No," Wei said. "We ate dinner before I came." "In this moment, right now, are your children starving?" "No, not yet. But soon." "Not soon." "No. In this moment, right now, are they in danger?" "Well, no, but..." "And in this moment, right now, is there anything you can do to make rain fall tomorrow?" Wei was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted. "There is nothing I can do." "Then in this moment," Liang said, "what is the worry for? Not for tomorrow. You cannot do anything about tomorrow right now. Not for next month. It does not exist yet. The worry is not functional. It does not help you or your family. It does not solve the problem. It is just a habit, a pattern of mind that says you must suffer about the future in order to be a good person, a responsible father, a dutiful man." They sat down on a flat rock overlooking the valley. The sun had nearly set now, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Despite the drought, despite the desperate circumstances, the evening was beautiful. The air was cool after the heat of the day. A small breeze stirred the dust. Somewhere, a night bird called. The great Taoist sage Lao Tzu taught that the wise person does not worry about the future, nor dwell on the past, Liang said softly. He wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present." You, brother, are living entirely in the future. You are suffering about things that have not happened, may never happen, and which you cannot control even if they do happen. "But that is what makes me different from you," Wei protested. "I take responsibility. I plan. I worry because I care about what happens to my family." "No," Liang said firmly. You worry because you believe the story that a good man must worry. But caring and worrying are not the same thing. I cared deeply about you, about your family, about the village. If there was something I could do to help, I would do it. But I do not torture myself with anxiety about things I cannot control. That is not care. That is just suffering. He pointed up at the sky, where more stars were appearing with each passing moment. Look at those stars. They have shone in the sky for thousands of years. They have watched droughts come and go. They have seen civilizations rise and fall. They shine on the just and the unjust alike, on the worried and the carefree, on the wise and the foolish. They do not worry about whether they will shine tomorrow. They simply shine now, fully, completely. That is their nature. I am not a star, Wei said. I am a man with responsibilities. You are a man, Liang agreed. And your nature, like the nature of the stars, is to be present to what is happening now, not to torture yourself with what might happen later. When the time comes to act, you will act. You have always been a man of action, a man who does what needs to be done. But right now, in this moment, there is nothing to do except be here, watching the stars come out, feeling the evening breeze, sitting with your brother who loves you. Wei felt something beginning to crack inside him, like ice starting to thaw. But if I don't worry, he said, and his voice was almost pleading, if I don't carry this burden of responsibility, who will? What kind of father, what kind of man would I be? You would be, Liang said, the kind of man who is fully present to his children when he is with them, rather than distracted by anxious thoughts. You would be the kind of husband who can comfort his wife, rather than adding to her fear with your own. You would be the kind of man who can see solutions when they appear, rather than being blinded by worry. You would be the kind of man who can enjoy the stars on a beautiful evening, even in the midst of difficulty. The Buddha himself taught this truth when he said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." Not because the future doesn't matter, but because the only time you can actually do anything is now. The only moment you can actually live is this one. Wei sat with this for a long time, watching the stars, feeling the breeze, aware of his brother's presence beside him, and slowly he began to notice something. With each passing minute that he wasn't actively worrying, nothing terrible happened. His family did not suddenly starve. The situation did not become worse. If anything, he felt a little lighter, a little more clear-headed, a little more capable of dealing with whatever might come. I think, he said slowly, that I have been confusing worry with responsibility. I thought that if I wasn't anxious, I wasn't taking the situation seriously. But worry is not action. Worry is not planning. Worry is just suffering about what might be. Yes, Liang said, and there was such warmth in his voice. You have been a responsible man your whole life. You have worked hard, provided for your family, done everything you could do. The worry is extra. It is unnecessary suffering layered on top of an already difficult situation. And the beautiful thing is, you can put it down. Not tomorrow, not when the drought ends, but right now. You can simply put it down. How? Wei asked. How do I just stop worrying? You don't stop it, Liang said. The mind will worry, that is what minds do. Thoughts of fear will arise, that is natural. But you don't have to believe them. You don't have to feed them. When the worry comes, you can notice it and say, "Ah, there is a worried thought, how interesting." And then you can bring your attention back to what is actually happening right now. Your breath, the stars, the cool evening air, the presence of someone who loves you. You can return, again and again, to the present moment. They sat together until the sky was fully dark and filled with stars. And in that time, Wei felt something he had not felt in months' peace. Not because the situation had changed. The drought was still there. The grain stores were still running low. The future was still uncertain. But in this moment, in this actual, real moment, everything was all right. He was alive. He could breathe. He was sitting with his brother under the stars. And that was enough. I have spent my whole life, Wei said quietly, trying to control the future. Trying to make sure everything would be all right. And I look at you, who has never tried to control anything, and you seem happier than I have ever been. How is that possible?" Liang laughed softly. The Tao Te Ching also teaches, "When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. When I let go of what I have, I receive what I need. I am not happier because I have more. I am happier because I have learned to be with what is, rather than fighting against it. The drought is hard for me too. I am hungry too. But I am not also fighting a war in my mind against the drought. I am just experiencing the drought, one day at a time, one moment at a time." "But doesn't that mean giving up?" Wei asked. "Doesn't that mean just accepting defeat?" "No," Liang said. "It means accepting reality. The drought is real. You cannot change that by worrying about it. But you can still take action. You can still plant crops when the rain returns. You can still ration the grain you have. You can still support your family. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means not wasting your energy fighting against what already is. It means saving your strength for the things you can actually do something about." The writer Eckhart Tolle, who would live many centuries in the future, would express the same truth. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Always work with it, not against it. Make it your friend and ally, not your enemy. This will miraculously transform your whole life. As Wei walked home that night, the stars lighting his path, he noticed that the worried thoughts still arose. His mind still wanted to spin stories about disaster, about failure, about all the terrible things that might happen. But now he saw them for what they were: just thoughts, just stories, not reality. Reality was this path under his feet, this cool night air, this vast sky above him. Reality was one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment at a time. When he arrived home, his wife met him at the door. "You look different," she said, lighter somehow. "I talked with Liang," he said, "and I realized something. I have been so worried about keeping us alive in the future that I have forgotten to actually live now. I cannot make rain fall. I cannot make grain appear where there is none. But I can be here, with you, with our children, fully present to this life we have right now." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I have been so frightened," she said, "not just of the drought, but of losing you to this terrible anxiety. It has been like you were not really here, even when you were standing right in front of me." "I know," he said, holding her. "I am here now. I cannot promise what tomorrow will bring, but I can promise to be here now." The drought did eventually end. The rains came, the crops grew again, and life returned to normal. But Wei was forever changed. He was still a responsible man, still hardworking and dutiful, but he no longer confused responsibility with worry, no longer thought he had to torture himself with anxiety to prove he cared. He had learned from his unconventional brother what no amount of studying could have taught him: that the present moment is the only moment we ever have, and that worry about the future is just a way of refusing to live the life that is actually happening right now. And sometimes, on clear evenings, the two brothers would walk up into the hills together and sit under the stars, saying little, simply being present to the moment, to each other, to the mysterious gift of existence that asks nothing from us except that we show up for it, again and again, as fully as we can. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you too can put down the burden of worry, even if just for these moments of sleep. The future will come whether you worry about it or not. But this moment, this breath, this gentle descent into rest, this is what is actually real, actually here, actually yours. Let tomorrow worry about itself. Tonight, simply be here, breathing, resting, alive to this moment that is always, always enough. There was once a potter who lived in a village in ancient Korea, a woman named Min Seo who had learned her craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before her. The pottery that came from Min Seo's hands was beautiful, graceful bowls, elegant vases, sturdy cups that felt perfect in the palm. People came from distant villages to buy her work, and she took great pride in her skill, in the perfection of each piece she created. Min Seo's workshop was her sanctuary. a place where she could lose herself in the rhythm of the wheel, the feel of clay beneath her fingers, the alchemy of turning earth and water into objects of beauty and utility. She worked long hours, often late into the night, pursuing an ideal of perfection that seemed always just beyond her reach. Each piece had to be flawless, the walls exactly the right thickness, the glaze applied with perfect evenness, the form balanced and harmonious. If a pot emerged from the kiln with even the slightest imperfection, a tiny crack or an uneven color, she would smash it without hesitation and begin again. Her apprentice, a young woman named Ji Wu, would sometimes wince when Min Seo destroyed these pieces. "But Master Min Seo," she would say, "that bowl was so beautiful. The crack is barely visible. Someone would surely treasure it." "Beauty requires perfection," Min Seo would reply, her voice firm. "A flawed piece is worthless. I will not allow my name to be associated with imperfection." This pursuit of flawlessness had made Min Seo's work famous, but it had also made her life increasingly joyless. She was never satisfied, never at peace. Each completed piece, no matter how beautiful, seemed to mock her with its tiny imperfections. She had become harsh, not only with her work, but with herself, unable to accept anything less than the impossible standard she had set. One autumn, a traveling monk came through the village. He was old, his robes worn and patched, his belongings contained in a single small bag. But there was something about him, a quality of presence, of deep peace that drew people to him. He would sit in the village square and talk with anyone who approached. His words simple but somehow profound, pointing to truths that people had forgotten or never known. Min Seo, hearing about this monk, felt a strange pull to meet him. She was not particularly spiritual, had little time for religion or philosophy. Her devotion was to her craft, to the pursuit of perfection. But something in her felt hungry, though she could not name what she hungered for. She found the monk sitting beneath a persimmon tree, watching leaves fall. She approached him and bowed. "Honored monk," she said, "I am Min Seo, a potter. People say you are wise. I have a question." The monk gestured for her to sit. "I do not know if I am wise," he said with a gentle smile, "but I will listen to your question." "I devote my life to creating perfect pottery," Min Seo said. "And yet I am never satisfied. No matter how skilled I become, I see flaws in everything I make. The pursuit of perfection has become a burden I can no longer carry. How do I create work that satisfies me? How do I achieve the perfection I seek?" The monk was quiet for a long moment, watching the leaves drift down from the tree. Finally, he said, "Tell me, when you look at this tree, do you see its imperfections?" Min Seo looked at the persimmon tree. It was gnarled and twisted, its branches growing in seemingly random directions. One side was fuller than the other. The trunk had a large knot in it. "Yes," she said, "it is quite imperfect. It grows crookedly. It is unbalanced." "And yet," the monk said, "it is beautiful, is it not? It bears fruit. It provides shade. Birds nest in its branches. Its very crookedness gives it character, makes it interesting to look at. If it were perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced, would it be more beautiful? Or would it be boring, lifeless, somehow less than what it is?" Min Seo frowned. "But a tree is natural. It grows as it will. Pottery is different. It is made by human hands and should reflect human skill and intention." "Ah," the monk said. "And are human hands not also natural? Is the potter not part of nature, just as the tree is? When you shape clay, is that not as natural as when the wind shapes a stone?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a small tea bowl. It was rough, clearly handmade, with an uneven glaze and a wobble in its base. "This bowl was given to me many years ago by a master potter in Japan. In his tradition, they prize something called wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, of impermanence, of incompleteness. This bowl is considered a treasure not despite its irregularities, but because of them. Each mark, each asymmetry tells a story. It shows the human hand that made it. It is alive in a way that a perfect, machine-like bowl could never be." Min Seo took the bowl, turning it in her hands. It was true that there was something appealing about it, something warm and alive, and yet her training rebelled against it. But surely, she said, this represents a lack of skill. A true master would be able to create a perfect bowl if she wished. Perhaps, the monk said, or perhaps a true master understands that perfection is not the goal. The goal is presence, is authenticity, is allowing the work to be what it is, rather than forcing it to be what you think it should be. The Japanese have a practice in pottery called kintsugi. When a bowl breaks, instead of throwing it away, they repair it with gold lacquer. The cracks become beautiful golden lines, and the bowl is considered more valuable for having been broken and repaired. The brokenness, the repair, the history, these are not hidden, but celebrated. He handed the bowl back to Min Seo. Your pursuit of perfection is actually a rejection of life itself. Life is imperfect. Everything in nature is asymmetrical, irregular, unique. The cloud does not form a perfect circle. The mountain is not a perfect cone. The flower does not bloom with mathematical precision. And yet all of these things are beautiful precisely because they are what they are, not trying to be anything else. The great poet Leonard Cohen would one day write, "There is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." But Min Seo, living centuries earlier, was hearing this truth for the first time, and it shook something deep inside her. "But if I accept imperfection," she said quietly, "does that not mean I stop trying? Does that not mean I become careless, sloppy, that I produce inferior work?" "No," the monk said firmly. "Accepting imperfection does not mean abandoning skill or care. It means working with love and attention and then allowing the work to be what it is. It means doing your best and accepting that your best is enough, even when it does not match your imagined ideal. It means understanding that the crack in the bowl, the unevenness in the glaze, the wobble in the base, these are not failures. They are proof that a human being made this object, that it came from hands and heart, not from a machine." He paused, looking at her with great kindness. "Tell me, Min Seo, when you destroy a pot because it has a tiny flaw, what are you really destroying? The pot, or some part of yourself that you judge as unworthy?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She thought about all the pieces she had smashed over the years, and suddenly she saw that she had been treating herself the same way she treated her pottery. Any flaw, any mistake, any failure to meet her impossible standards, and she would mentally smash herself, start over, refuse to accept what was. Tears began to flow down her face. "I have been so harsh," she whispered, "so cruel, not just to my work, but to myself." The monk reached out and gently touched her hand. "Yes, and this harshness has not made you a better potter. It has only made you a more miserable human being. What if, instead of pursuing perfection, you pursued authenticity? What if you allowed each piece to emerge exactly as it is, with all its quirks and irregularities, and trusted that this is enough? What if you treated your work and yourself with compassion rather than judgment?" Min Seo sat with this for a long time, the tea bowl still in her hands, feeling the weight of years of self-criticism, of impossible standards, of joyless striving. And slowly she began to feel something shift, like a tight knot beginning to loosen. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "The pursuit of perfection has been my whole life. I don't know who I am without it." "Then perhaps it is time to discover who you are," the monk said. "Not who you think you should be, but who you actually are. Not the perfect potter you imagine you must become, but the real, flawed, beautiful human being sitting here beneath this crooked tree." After the monk left the village, Min Seo returned to her workshop. She sat at her wheel and began to work. But this time she tried something different. Instead of forcing the clay into a predetermined shape, instead of constantly correcting and adjusting, she allowed her hands to move more freely. She felt the clay, listened to it, let it guide her as much as she guided it. The bowl that emerged was different from anything she had made before. It was less symmetrical, less controlled. One side was slightly thicker than the other. The rim had a gentle wave to it rather than being perfectly level. When she applied the glaze, Instead of obsessing over making it perfectly even, she let it pool and run in places, creating patterns she had not planned. When the piece came out of the kiln, her first instinct was to examine it critically, to find its flaws and destroy it. But she stopped herself. She picked up the bowl and really looked at it, not with judgment, but with curiosity. And she saw that it was beautiful, not perfect, but alive. The unevenness gave it movement. The pooled glaze created depth and interest. The slight wobble made it feel intimate, personal, as if it were made for one specific person's hands. She set it aside, intact, unsmashed, and then she made another piece and another, each time trying to let go a little more, to control a little less, to accept what emerged rather than forcing it to match an ideal. Ji Wu, her apprentice, watched this transformation with amazement. "Master Min Seo," she said one day, "your new work is so different. It feels more, I don't know how to say it, more human, more warm." "It is more honest," Min Seo said. "For years I tried to remove all trace of my humanity from my work, to make it machine perfect. But pottery is not made by machines. It is made by human hands, and human hands are imperfect. Now I am trying to let that imperfection show, to let my humanity be visible in the work." Strangely, people loved the new pieces even more than the old ones. They would come to her workshop and say things like, "This bowl feels like it has a soul," or "This cup fits my hand as if it were made just for me." The imperfections, the irregularities, these made each piece unique, gave each object a personality. But more importantly, Min Seo herself had changed. She no longer worked with the grim determination of someone trying to achieve the impossible. She worked with joy, with playfulness, with curiosity about what each piece would become. She made mistakes and learned from them instead of destroying the evidence. She created pieces that surprised her, that taught her things about clay and form that years of controlled perfection never had. One day, a bowl cracked as she was taking it from the kiln. The old Min Seo would have thrown it away immediately, but she remembered what the monk had said about kintsugi, about repairing cracks with gold. She carefully glued the pieces back together with a special lacquer mixed with gold dust. The crack became a golden lightning bolt running through the bowl, and it was breathtaking. She kept that bowl for herself, displayed it in her workshop where she could see it every day. It reminded her that brokenness does not mean worthlessness, that repair is possible, that sometimes things are more beautiful for having been broken and put back together. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Min Seo's wound had been her perfectionism, her harsh judgment of herself and her work. And it was through that wound, through finally allowing it to crack open, that light had entered, the light of compassion, of acceptance, of understanding that imperfection is not failure, but simply being human. Years later, when Min Seo was old and had students of her own, she would tell them the story of the monk and the crooked persimmon tree. "Do not pursue perfection," she would say. "Pursue presence, pursue authenticity. Work with skill and attention, but then let the piece be what it is. Trust that your best is enough. Trust that your humanity, with all its quirks and limitations, is not something to hide, but something to celebrate." And she would show them the bowl with the golden crack running through it. "This," she would say, "is my most important work, not because it is perfect, but because it taught me that broken things can be beautiful, that failure can be transformed into art, that the cracks are where the light gets in. Tonight as you rest, perhaps you can release the burden of perfectionism, the harsh judgment of yourself for not being flawless. You are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be human, with all the beautiful irregularities that entails. Your cracks, your wounds, your imperfections. These are not failures. They are proof that you have lived, that you have tried, that you are real. Let yourself be like Min Seo's pottery, authentic, unique, imperfectly perfect. Let your quirks and asymmetries show. Let your humanity be visible, and know that you are enough, exactly as you are. Not despite your imperfections, but including them, celebrating them, allowing them to be part of what makes you beautifully, irreplaceably you. Rest now, imperfect and beautiful, cracked and golden. human, and enough. In a monastery deep in the forests of medieval Europe, there lived a monk named Brother Thomas who was troubled by a question that would not leave him alone. The question was this: if God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does suffering exist? Why do children die? Why do the innocent suffer? Why does evil seem to flourish while goodness struggles? Brother Thomas was not a young man. He was perhaps 40, had been in the monastery since his early 20s, but this question had haunted him his entire life. It had driven him to the monastery in the first place, this desperate need to understand, to find answers, to make sense of a world that seemed so often cruel and senseless. He had studied theology and philosophy, had read every text in the monastery's extensive library, had prayed for hours each day, had consulted with the abbot and with visiting scholars. But no answer satisfied him. Every explanation felt hollow. Every theological argument seemed like clever words trying to cover over a truth too terrible to face. The other monks had grown weary of Thomas's constant questioning. "Have faith," they would tell him. "God's ways are mysterious. We are not meant to understand everything." But these answers felt like giving up to Thomas, like intellectual cowardice. How could he have faith in a God whose actions seemed contradictory to his supposed nature? How could he worship a being who created a world full of suffering? The question consumed him. It kept him awake at night. It distracted him from his prayers and his work. It had become, in a way, his own form of suffering, this need to understand, this inability to accept mystery, this relentless demand that the universe make sense according to his own logic. One winter, a plague came to the region. It swept through the nearby villages, killing indiscriminately the old and the young, the good and the wicked, believers and non-believers alike. The monastery opened its doors to care for the sick, and the monks worked tirelessly to ease suffering, to provide comfort, to bury the dead with dignity. Brother Thomas threw himself into this work with almost desperate energy. He bathed fevered bodies, held dying hands, whispered prayers over those who could no longer speak. And with each death he witnessed, his question became more anguished, more insistent. Why? Why this child who had barely lived? Why this mother of 5? Why this pious old man who had devoted his entire life to prayer? One night, exhausted and despairing, Thomas went to the chapel alone. It was past midnight, and the other monks were sleeping. He knelt before the altar, and for the first time in his life, he did not pray. Instead, he shouted. He shouted at God, at the universe, at the silence that seemed to be the only answer to all his questions. "Why?" he cried out, his voice echoing in the empty chapel. "Why do you allow this? If you are love, where is that love in the face of this senseless death? If you are powerful, why do you not stop it? What kind of God creates a world of such suffering? What kind of God watches children die and does nothing?" He wept, his body shaking with sobs, with rage, with the accumulated grief and confusion of years. "I have given my life to you," he said, his voice breaking. "I have prayed, I have studied, I have tried to serve you, and still I do not understand. Still the world makes no sense. Still there is no answer that satisfies." He collapsed on the cold stone floor, spent, empty, beyond prayer or hope or even anger. And in that emptiness, in that complete exhaustion of his need to understand, something shifted. He heard no voice, saw no vision, but somehow, lying there on the chapel floor, he became aware of something he had never noticed before. The silence was not empty, it was full. It was not the absence of an answer, but a different kind of answer, one that could not be spoken in words, could not be captured in logical arguments, could not be contained in theological systems. It was the answer of presence, of being with rather than explaining away. And in that moment, Brother Thomas understood something that all his studying had never taught him. He understood that his demand for an explanation was itself a kind of violence, a kind of refusal to be with what is. He wanted God to make sense according to his limited human logic, wanted the universe to operate according to principles he could understand and accept. But what if reality was larger than his understanding? What if mystery was not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be lived? He thought about the people he had cared for during the plague. When they were dying, when they were suffering, they did not need explanations. They needed presence. They needed someone to hold their hand, to sit with them, to acknowledge their pain without trying to justify it or explain it away. The most comforting thing he could offer was not answers, but accompaniment, being with them in their suffering rather than standing apart and trying to make sense of it. And he realized that this was what the silence was offering him, not an explanation for suffering, but a presence with him in his confusion and pain, not a theological system that made everything make sense, but a deep, abiding companionship in the midst of mystery. The next morning, Brother Thomas returned to his work caring for the sick, but something in him had changed. He no longer felt tormented by the question of why suffering exists, not because he had found an answer, but because he had realized that the question itself was a kind of escape, an escape from actually being present to suffering, his own and others. When he sat with a dying person now, he did not torture himself with theological questions. He simply sat, fully present, offering whatever comfort he could. When a child died, he did not demand that God explain himself. He simply grieved, allowed himself to feel the sorrow, honored the preciousness of the life that had been lost. The abbot noticed the change in him. One day, as they were working together in the monastery garden, the old man said, "You seem different, Brother Thomas, more peaceful somehow. Have you finally found the answer to your question?" Thomas paused in his digging, considering. "No," he said slowly, "I have not found an answer, but I have stopped needing one. Or rather, I have discovered that there are different kinds of answers, not explanations, but ways of being, not reasons, but responses." "Tell me more," the abbot said, settling onto a bench, his old joints grateful for the rest. "I have been asking the wrong question," Thomas said. "I have been asking, why does suffering exist? As if there were some explanation that would make it acceptable, some reason that would justify it. But suffering is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality to be faced, to be witnessed, to be endured, and sometimes transcended, but not explained away." He sat down next to the abbot. The great mystic Julian of Norwich wrote, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." For years I thought this was foolish optimism, a refusal to face reality. But now I think she meant something different. Not that suffering is not real, not that pain does not matter, but that there is something deeper than suffering, something that holds all of it, the pain and the joy, the death and the life, the questions and the silence, and that this something is love. The abbot nodded slowly. "Yes, this is what we mean by faith, Thomas. Not certainty about answers, but trust in presence. Not understanding why things happen, but believing that we are not alone in them." "But how can we call it love?" Thomas asked, and the question was gentler now, less demanding when there is so much suffering. "How can love allow such pain?" "Perhaps," the abbot said, "we have been thinking about love wrongly. We imagine it as protection, as keeping us safe from harm. But what if love is not about preventing suffering, but about being with us in it? What if love is not a parent who shields a child from every possible pain, but a companion who walks beside us through whatever comes?" He gestured around them at the garden, where early spring flowers were beginning to push through the soil despite the cold. "Look at these flowers. They do not bloom because life is easy. They bloom because blooming is what they do, even though frost may come, even though they will eventually wither and die. The beauty is not in avoiding death, but in fully living despite it, because of it, through it." The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who lived in that same era, taught that God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk. Brother Thomas was beginning to understand this truth. He had been walking away from God by demanding explanations, by insisting that the divine conform to his understanding. But God had been there all along, in the silence, in the mystery, in the presence that does not explain, but simply is. In the years that followed, Brother Thomas became known as a great spiritual counselor. People would come to him with their own questions about suffering, their own struggles with faith, and he would not give them theological arguments or philosophical explanations. Instead, he would listen. He would sit with them in their pain. He would acknowledge that yes, it is hard. Yes, it does not make sense. Yes, the suffering is real and terrible. And then he would say, but you are not alone in it. Whatever this mystery is that we call God, that we call love, that we call the ground of being, it is here with you. Not explaining, not justifying, but present. And sometimes presence is the only answer that matters. He would tell them about the night in the chapel, about his rage and despair, about the silence that was not empty but full. I wanted answers, he would say. I wanted God to defend himself, to explain himself, to make it all make sense. But what I received instead was something I had not known to ask, for the recognition that I am held, that we are all held, in something larger than our understanding. One young monk, struggling with his own doubts, asked Thomas, "But Father, how do we know this presence is real? How do we know we are not just comforting ourselves with illusions?" Thomas smiled. "We do not know, not in the way we know that 2 + 2 = 4. Faith is not that kind of knowledge. It is more like love. How do you know someone loves you? Not by proof, not by logical argument, but by presence, by attention, by 1,000 small acts of companionship. You know it in your bones, in your heart, in a place deeper than thinking." The great Buddhist teacher Shunryu Suzuki would one day say, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." Brother Thomas had been an expert in suffering, certain that he understood the question, certain that there must be a logical answer. But when he became a beginner again, when he admitted that he did not understand, when he let go of his demand for explanations, new possibilities opened. Not answers exactly, but ways of being with the questions that transformed them from tortures into teachers. As Thomas grew older, his peace deepened. Not because life became easier, the monastery saw more plagues, more deaths, more inexplicable suffering. But Thomas had learned to meet it differently. He had learned that faith is not about understanding everything, but about trusting the mystery, about believing that we are held even when we cannot see the hands that hold us, about knowing that love is present even in the midst of suffering. On his deathbed, many years later, the younger monks gathered around him. One of them asked, "Father Thomas, after all these years, have you found your answer? Do you now understand why suffering exists?" Thomas smiled, his old face peaceful. "No," he said softly, "I still do not understand why, but I have learned that why is not the only question. There is also how. How shall we respond to suffering, and who? Who are we in the midst of it? And, most importantly, where is love? Where is presence? Where is the grace that holds us even in the darkest moments?" He paused, his breathing labored. "I have learned that some questions are not meant to be answered, but to be lived. That mystery is not the enemy of faith, but its very ground. That not understanding is not failure, but honesty. And that in the end, what matters is not whether we can explain the universe, but whether we can love. Love ourselves, love each other, love the mysterious presence that some call God and others call by different names, but which we all know in our deepest moments as the thing that holds us, accompany, Isis, and will not let us go. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you too carry questions that have no answers, mysteries that refuse to be solved, suffering that cannot be explained. And perhaps, like Brother Thomas, you can release the burden of needing to understand everything. Perhaps you can allow yourself to rest in mystery, to be held by a presence that does not explain but simply is. The universe may not make sense according to your logic. Life may not follow the rules you think it should, but you are here, breathing, held in existence by forces beyond your comprehension, part of a mystery so vast that your inability to understand it is not failure, but humility, not ignorance, but wisdom. Let the questions be. Let the mystery remain mysterious. Let yourself be held by what you cannot grasp, loved by what you cannot comprehend, accompanied by a presence that asks nothing from you except that you allow it to be with you, here, now, in this moment that is always enough. Rest now in not knowing, in the fertile darkness of mystery, in the silence that is not empty but full of everything you need. In the coastal villages of West Africa, there lived a woman named Adayes, whose gift was storytelling. She had learned the art from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before her, in an unbroken line stretching back through generations too numerous to count. Adayes knew hundreds of stories, stories of how the world began, stories of trickster spirits and wise ancestors, stories that explained why the turtle has a cracked shell and why the moon waxes and wanes. But there was one story she had never told, a story so important that her grandmother had made her promise never to share it until she understood it completely. The story was called The Story That Contains All Stories, and her grandmother had told it to her only once, on the night before she died. Adayes had been perhaps 20 years old then, already known as a talented storyteller, but still young, still certain of many things that would later reveal themselves as far more complex than she imagined. "Listen carefully," her grandmother had said, her voice weak, but her eyes still bright. "I will tell you the story only once, and you must hold it in your heart until you truly understand it. When that day comes, you will know, and then you may share it with others who are ready to hear." The story her grandmother told was strange and simple. It went like this. Once, before time began, there was only the One. The One was everything and nothing, infinite and empty, perfect and complete. But the One was also lonely, for there was nothing that was not. One, nothing to know itself by contrast, nothing to love that was separate from itself. So the One made a choice. It shattered itself into infinite pieces, becoming the many. It became stars and stones, oceans and insects, trees and human beings, thoughts and dreams and everything that exists. And in becoming the many, the One forgot that it was one. Each piece believed itself to be separate, alone, individual. This forgetting was necessary, for how could the One truly experience itself as many if it remembered it was one? And so began the great game, the cosmic dance, the divine play, each piece of the One seeking, searching, trying to return home, not knowing that home is what it already is, that the One it seeks is looking through its own eyes, breathing with its own breath, beating in its own heart. The story ends this way. One day, each piece will remember, not through effort or achievement, but through a simple recognition. And in that moment of remembering, nothing will change and everything will change. The many will still be many, but they will know themselves as one, and the One will experience itself through infinite eyes, infinite hearts, infinite moments of discovery. When her grandmother finished the story, young Adayes had felt confused. "But grandmother," she had said, "I don't understand. What does it mean? Is it saying we are all God? That we are all one? How can that be true when we are so clearly separate?" Her grandmother had smiled. "You are not ready yet. Hold the story, live with it. One day you will understand not with your mind but with your whole being, and on that day you may share it." That had been 30 years ago. Adayes was now 50. A grandmother herself, respected throughout the region as a keeper of stories and wisdom. She had lived much in those 30 years, had married and buried a husband, had borne children and raised them to adulthood, had known joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss. She had told thousands of stories to thousands of people, had watched her words comfort the grieving, inspire the hopeless, teach the young, and connect her community to its ancient roots. But she had never told the story that contains all stories. She had held it in her heart, had pondered it during sleepless nights, had tested it against her experiences. And while she felt she understood it intellectually, yes, all things are connected, yes, separation is an illusion, yes, we are all part of the same existence, she knew this was not the understanding her grandmother had meant. Intellectual understanding was just more words, more concepts. The real understanding would be something else entirely. One dry season, a terrible thing happened. Adeyeze's youngest daughter, her baby, her beloved Chiamaka, died in childbirth along with the infant she had been carrying. The grief was devastating, absolute. Adeyeze felt as if she had been torn in half, as if part of her own body had been ripped away. She could not eat, could not sleep, could barely breathe. The woman who had comforted so many others with her stories found no comfort in words. For weeks, she sat in her hut, seeing no one, speaking to no one. The villagers worried about her, brought food she did not eat, offered condolences she could not hear. She was drowning in grief, and no story, no wisdom, no philosophy could touch the raw reality of her pain. One night, unable to bear the darkness of her hut any longer, she walked out into the village. It was very late, and most people were asleep. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. She walked without destination, her feet carrying her where they would, and eventually she found herself at the edge of the ocean. She stood there, looking out at the vast water, hearing the eternal rhythm of the waves. And suddenly, without warning, without seeking it, something shifted inside her. She saw the moonlight reflecting on the water, saw how each wave caught the light and threw it back, creating thousands upon thousands of points of brightness dancing on the surface. Each point of light seemed separate, individual, dancing its own dance. And yet all of them were the same light, the moon's light, reflected and multiplied, but always the same light. And in that moment, Adeyeze understood. She understood the story that contains all stories, not as a concept, but as a lived truth, a recognition that went deeper than thought. Her daughter was not gone. Her daughter was the moonlight on the water, was the wave that rose and fell, was the breath moving through Adeyeze's own lungs, was the grief itself, was the love that made the grief possible. Nothing was lost because nothing could be lost. The form had changed. Her daughter was no longer in a body that Adeyeze could touch and hold, but the essence, the light itself, was eternal and everywhere. And more than that, Adeyeze herself was not separate from her daughter. They were both waves in the same ocean, both reflections of the same light, both temporary expressions of the one that plays at being many. The grief was real, the love was real, the loss was real, but they were all happening within something larger, something that held it all, something that was never born and would never die. She fell to her knees in the sand weeping, but the quality of the tears had changed. She was weeping not just with grief, but with recognition, with the overwhelming beauty and terror of understanding how things actually are. She was the ocean weeping for the wave, not realizing it was also the wave, and also the water, and also the weeping itself. She heard her grandmother's voice in her memory. One day you will understand, not with your mind, but with your whole being. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was that day. The next morning, Adeyeze emerged from her hut for the first time in weeks. She was thinner. Her eyes were still marked by grief, but something had changed. There was a depth to her presence, a quality of having touched something beyond words and returned. She gathered the village together that evening, as she had done countless times before. The people came, happy to see her, but also worried, not knowing what to expect. She sat in her usual place, the place where storytellers had sat for generations, and she looked at all the faces turned toward her, young and old, friend and stranger, all waiting. "I am going to tell you a story," she said, "that my grandmother told me 30 years ago. She made me promise not to share it until I understood it. Tonight I understand it, and so I will share it with you." And she told them the story that contains all stories, told it exactly as her grandmother had told her. When she finished, there was silence. Some people looked confused. Others looked thoughtful. A few seemed deeply moved, though perhaps they could not say why. Then a young man raised his hand. "Adeyeze," he said respectfully, "I am trying to understand. Are you saying that we are all one? That there is no real separation between us?" Adeyeze nodded. "Yes, but not as an idea, not as something to believe. The story is pointing to something that can only be recognized, never grasped by the thinking mind. An old woman spoke up. But if we are all one, why do we feel so separate? Why does it hurt when someone we love dies, if they are not truly separate from us? Because the forgetting is real, Adayas said softly. The one truly forgets itself in becoming the many. The separation is an illusion, but it is an illusion we actually experience. The pain is real, the love is real, the grief is real. They are all part of the divine play, part of how the one experiences itself. She paused, looking out at her people, feeling the love that connected her to each of them, the invisible threads that bound them all together. "My daughter died," she said, and her voice broke a little, "and I have grieved her with every particle of my being. That grief is not erased by this understanding, but it is held within something larger. I am grieving, and I am also the grief, and I am also what witnesses the grief, and I am also what holds it all with infinite tenderness." A young mother with a baby in her arms asked, "How does this help us? How does it change how we live?" Adayze considered this. "It changes everything and nothing," she said finally. "You still love, still lose, still experience joy and sorrow. But underneath it all, there is a recognition that you are not as small or as alone or as separate as you thought. Every person you meet is yourself in disguise. Every tree, every animal, every star, all of it is the one pretending to be many, playing hide and seek with itself." The Sufi poet Rumi, who lived in another time and place, expressed the same truth when he wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." Each person sitting in that circle was a drop, seemingly small and separate, but each drop contained the entire ocean, was made of the same water, was inseparable from the whole. "The great secret," Adayes continued, "is that the one is always seeking to remember itself through us. Every moment of love is the one loving itself. Every moment of beauty is the one recognizing itself. Every moment of connection is the one remembering it was never actually divided." An elder man, who had been quiet until now, spoke. "I think I have known this," he said slowly. "There have been moments watching my grandson play or seeing the sun rise over the water when I felt, I don't know how to say it, when I felt that there was no me watching but just the watching itself, when everything seemed to be part of the same thing." "Yes," Adayes said, her eyes bright. "Those moments are grace, are cracks in the illusion through which the truth shines. Most of the time we live in the forgetting. We believe we are separate selves, isolated individuals, alone in our own heads. But sometimes the veil lifts, sometimes we remember, and those moments change us. Throughout the night, people ask questions, and Adayes answered as best she could. But she knew that the story itself was not really something that could be explained. It was a seed planted in consciousness, something that would grow in its own time for each person who heard it. As the gathering was ending, a young girl approached Adayeze shyly. "Grandmother Adayeze," she said, "I liked your story, but I'm not sure I understand it. Does it mean that when my dog died last month, he's still here somehow?" Adayeze knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "What do you think?" she asked gently. "When you remember your dog, when you feel the love you had for him, where is he?" The girl thought about this. "In my heart," she said, "in my memories." "And are those memories part of you or separate from you?" "Part of me." "Then your dog is part of you." He changed form from something you could touch to something you carry inside. But the love is still there. The connection is still there. And in a way, you are still together because everything that is always together, always one, just appearing in different forms. The girl smiled, satisfied in a way she couldn't quite articulate. And Adayes saw in that smile a glimmer of the understanding that would grow in the child over time, that would perhaps bloom fully when she was older and had lived enough to recognize the truth the story was pointing toward. In the years that followed, the story that contains all stories, spread from village to village, carried by travelers, told by other storytellers, changed and adapted as stories always are. Some people dismissed it as meaningless mysticism. Others cherished it as the deepest truth they had ever heard. Most held it somewhere in between, pondering it, testing it against their own experiences, slowly recognizing in their own moments of grace what Adayes had recognized that night by the ocean. And Adayes continued to tell stories, continued to serve her community with her gift. But now all her stories were held within the understanding of that one story. Every tale she told was, in some way, a version of the one forgetting and remembering itself, of separation and reunion, of the eternal dance of consciousness playing in infinite forms. She knew that her own death would come one day, perhaps soon, and when it did, she would dissolve back into the ocean like a wave, would release this particular form called Adayes, and become once again the light that had only temporarily worn her shape. And that would be neither sad nor happy, neither good nor bad. It would simply be the continuation of the dance, the eternal rhythm of form and formlessness, of manifestation and dissolution, of the one eternally playing at being many. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too are a wave dissolving back into the ocean. Perhaps this moment of rest is a small death, a small return, a temporary release of the illusion of separation. And perhaps, in your dreams, you will remember what you truly are. Not this small separate self you think you are, but the entire ocean wearing a human form, the one light reflected in this particular mirror, the infinite consciousness playing at being finite for the sheer joy and terror and beauty. The game. Rest now, wave in the ocean, ocean in the wave, one and many, separate and together, eternally yourself and eternally everything, held in the story that contains all stories, the story that is your deepest truth. In the mountains of Peru, in a time before the Spanish conquest, there lived a young woman named Cori who was chosen to become a mamacuna, a priestess of the sun. She was taken from her family at the age of 10, as was the custom for girls who showed special promise, and brought to the temple where she would spend the rest of her life in service to Inti, the sun god, and to the Inca emperor who was considered Inti's son on earth. Cori took to her training with great dedication. She learned to weave the finest cloth, to prepare the sacred chicha, to tend the eternal flames, to chant the prayers at the proper times. She learned the stories of the gods, the rituals of the seasons, the ways of reading signs in the movement of stars and the behavior of animals. By the time she was 20, she was considered one of the most devout and skilled of all the mamacunas, a model of perfect service. But despite her outward devotion, despite the precision with which she performed every ritual and the fervor with which she spoke every prayer, something troubled Cori. She had given her entire life to serving the sun god, yet she had never felt his presence. She had never experienced the divine connection that the high priestess spoke of, had never felt touched by the sacred. She performed the rituals because it was her duty, because it was what she had been trained to do. But in her heart there was a growing emptiness, a sense that she was going through motions without understanding their meaning. She tried to hide this doubt, this spiritual dryness. To admit such things would be shameful, perhaps even dangerous. And so she became even more rigorous in her practices, as if perfection in form could substitute for the genuine experience she lacked. She rose before dawn to greet the sun with prayers. She fasted on the prescribed days. She memorized more chants, performed more offerings, gave more of herself to the service of the temple. But the emptiness only grew. She felt like a fraud, like a hollow vessel pretending to be full. And the harder she tried to feel something, the more the feeling eluded her. One day, the high priestess called Cori to her chambers. The old woman was perhaps 70, had served in the temple for 60 years, and was said to have visions, to commune directly with the divine. Cori approached her with both reverence and fear, wondering if somehow her secret doubt had been discovered. "Sit, child," the high priestess said, gesturing to a cushion. Her voice was kind, not accusatory. Cori sat, her heart pounding. "You are troubled," the high priestess said. It was not a question. Cori lowered her eyes. I do not know what you mean, mother. Do not lie to me or to yourself. I see it in your eyes, in the way you perform the rituals. You do everything perfectly, but there is no joy in it, no presence. You are like a beautiful instrument that plays all the correct notes, but produces no music. Tell me what troubles you." And so, haltingly, Corey confessed. She told of her years of service, of her dedication, of her desperate attempts to feel what she thought she should feel. "I have given everything," she said, tears beginning to flow. "But I feel nothing. I pray to Inti, but the sun is just the sun. I make offerings, but they are just objects placed on an altar. I chant the prayers, but they are just words. Where is the God I am meant to serve? Why has he never revealed himself to me?" The high priestess was quiet for a long time, looking at Corey with eyes that held both compassion and something like amusement. Finally, she said, "Tell me, Corey, when you watch the sun rise each morning, what do you see?" "I see the sun rising, Mother. I see light spreading across the mountains. I see the darkness receding. And when you feel the warmth on your face, what do you feel?" "I feel warmth, light, the heat of the sun." "And is this not Inti? Is this not the God you seek?" Corey frowned, confused. "But that is just the sun, the physical sun. I am seeking the spiritual presence, the divine consciousness that dwells beyond the physical." The high priestess smiled. "And where do you think this beyond is? Where is the spiritual realm separate from the physical world?" I don't know. In the heavens? In some invisible realm. And yet you have never been to this realm, never seen it, never touched it. You believe in it because you were taught to believe in it. But have you ever considered that the separation between physical and spiritual, between ordinary and sacred, might itself be the illusion?" Corey felt dizzy, as if the ground was shifting beneath her. "I don't understand." The high priestess rose, surprisingly spry for her age, and beckoned Corey to follow. They walked out of the temple, into the courtyard, where the morning sun was now fully risen. The priestess turned her face to the light, closed her eyes, and stood in silence for a long moment. "This," she said finally, "is Inti. Not an invisible being who lives somewhere else and merely uses the sun as a symbol. The sun itself is the God. The warmth you feel is the divine touch. The light that allows you to see is sacred consciousness made manifest. There is no separation between the physical sun and the spiritual sun. They are one and the same." She opened her eyes and looked at Corey. "You have been seeking God somewhere else, somewhere beyond, somewhere other than here. But God is not elsewhere. God is exactly here, exactly this, exactly what is." "But," Corey protested, "if that is true, then everything is God. The rocks, the water, the animals, the people?" "Yes," the high priestess said simply. "Everything is God. Everything is sacred. The divine is not something separate from creation, but is creation itself, is the creative force flowing through all things, is the intelligence that shapes the mountains and guides the condor's flight and beats your heart without you having to think about it." She sat down on a stone bench and patted the space beside her. Corey sat, her mind reeling. "There is an old teaching," the priestess continued, "that we do not speak of often because most people are not ready to hear it. The teaching says that when we worship Inti, when we make offerings to Pachamama, when we pray to the mountain spirits, we are not petitioning external beings who might grant us favors. We are recognizing and honoring the sacred that is already and always present. We are training ourselves to see what is always here but usually invisible to us because we have been taught to look elsewhere." She picked up a small stone from the ground. "This stone," she said, "contains the same divine essence as the sun. The difference is only in form, in how that essence is expressing itself. The sun is divine energy expressing as light and heat. This stone is divine energy expressing as solidity and stillness. Your body is divine energy expressing as flesh and breath and consciousness. All of it is God playing in different forms, wearing different masks, dancing different dances." The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, in a distant land and future time, would teach, "God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk." The high priestess was pointing to the same truth, that the divine Corey sought had never been absent, had never been elsewhere, had always been the very ground of her being, the consciousness through which she sought. But if this is true, Corey said slowly, then why do we have rituals? Why do we have temples and priests? Why not just live if everything is already sacred? Ah, said the priestess, now you are asking the right question. We have rituals not to bring the sacred into the ordinary, but to help us recognize that the ordinary is already sacred. We have temples not because God lives in them and not elsewhere, but because they are places set apart where we practice remembering what is always true everywhere. She held up the stone again. Look at this, really look at it. See its color, its texture, its weight in my palm. Now, can you see it as sacred? Can you see it as divine energy temporarily taking this form? Can you feel reverence for this small, ordinary stone? Corey looked at the stone, really looked at it, and something shifted in her perception. She saw not just a stone, but an ancient thing, forged in the heart of the earth, shaped by wind and water, holding within it the history of the world. She saw the miracle of its existence, the improbability that this particular configuration of matter should exist at all. And yes, she felt something like reverence, like wonder. Yes, she whispered, I can see it. Good, the priestess said. Now look at your hand. Can you see that as sacred too? Can you see the miracle of your flesh, your bones, your blood flowing through veins, your nerves carrying signals, all of it happening without your conscious effort? All of it an expression of the same intelligence that spins the stars and grows the corn. Corey looked at her hand as if seeing it for the first time. The lines in her palm, the texture of her skin, the way her fingers moved when she willed them to. It was miraculous. It was sacred. It had always been sacred, but she had never noticed. The great secret, the priestess said, is that there is no separation between you and the divine you seek. You are not a worshipper petitioning God. You are God, temporarily forgetting itself, playing at being Corey, so that it can have the experience of seeking itself, of searching for what it already is. She stood up, brushing dust from her robes. Come, I will show you something. She led Corey to a small pool of water in the courtyard, perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Look, she said. Corey looked at the water and saw her own face reflected, saw the clouds drifting behind her, saw the blue of the sky. The water receives all of this, your face, the clouds, the sky, but it is not changed by it. The reflections come and go, but the water remains water. In the same way, consciousness receives all experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, the whole play of life, but is not changed by it. You are not the reflections. You are the water. You are not the experiences. You are the awareness in which all experience arises. Corey stared at the pool, and suddenly she understood. For years, she had been trying to manufacture a special experience, a particular feeling that would prove God's presence. But she had been looking in the wrong place. The presence she sought was not in some special experience. It was in the awareness that noticed all experiences, the consciousness that was always present whether she was happy or sad, praying or working, awake or asleep. The Upanishads, the priestess said. Though Corey did not recognize the word, it came from a teaching tradition on the other side of the world. Teach tat tavam asis, thou art that. You are not separate from the divine. You are not seeking God. You are God seeking itself through the eyes of Corey. Tears were flowing down Corey's face now, but they were different from the tears she had shed in the priestess's chamber. These were tears of recognition, of relief, of coming home to something she had never left. I have been looking for something extraordinary, she said, when the truth is that everything is extraordinary. I have been trying to reach something far away when it has always been closer than my own breath. Yes, the priestess said softly. And now, when you perform the rituals, you will do so not to reach something absent, but to celebrate something present. When you greet the sunrise, you will not be praying to a distant God, but recognizing your own source, your own essence, meeting itself in the form of light. When you tend to sacred fire, you will know that the fire is sacred, not because we declare it so, but because all fire is transformation. is the divine energy converting matter to light and heat. Over the following months, everything changed for Corey, and nothing changed. She still rose before dawn, still performed the same rituals, still spoke the same prayers. But now there was joy in it, presence, a sense of participation in something vast and beautiful. She was no longer performing duties to appease an external deity. She was celebrating existence itself, honoring the sacred that flowed through all things, recognizing herself as an expression of the divine play. She began to see the other Mamakunas differently too. Some, she realized, were like she had been going through the motions, seeking something they thought was elsewhere, trapped in duty without understanding. Others had found what she had found, carried that quiet recognition in their eyes and their movements, and she understood that this was not something that could be taught directly, only pointed to. Each person had to make the recognition for themselves. One day, a new girl was brought to the temple, frightened and homesick, torn from her family as Corey had been. Corey was assigned to help train her. As she taught the girl the rituals, the prayers, the proper ways of service, she would sometimes stop and say, "But remember, the sacred is not only here in the temple, it is everywhere. It is in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the mountains and the rivers. We come here not because God lives only in this place, but because this is where we practice remembering what is true in all places." The girl did not understand at first, how could she? But Corey planted seeds as the high priestess had planted seeds in her, and perhaps one day the girl too would recognize what had always been true. The Sufi poet Hafiz wrote, "I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being." This was what the high priestess had shown Corey, not something new, but what had always been there, hidden in plain sight, the light that she was, the consciousness that she had always been, seeking itself through all her years of practice and doubt. Years later, when Corey herself became the high priestess, she would look at the young Mamakunas seeking what she had once sought and smile with compassion. She would wait for the ones who were ready, the ones whose seeking had exhausted itself enough that they could receive the truth. And to them, she would say what had been said to her: "The God you seek is not absent. The God you seek is seeking itself through you. You are not separated from the divine. You are the divine, temporarily pretending to be separate, so that it can know itself, so that it can experience the joy of searching and the bliss of recognition." Tonight, as you release yourself into sleep, perhaps you too can release the search for something beyond, something elsewhere, something other than what is. Perhaps you can recognize that this breath, this body, this awareness that notices all things, this is already sacred, already divine, already the presence you have been seeking. You are not separated from God. You are not exiled from the sacred. You are the infinite consciousness temporarily wearing a human form, pretending to be lost so that you can experience the joy of being found, pretending to seek so that you can know the relief of recognition. Rest now in what you already are, what you have always been, what you could never not be, the divine play, playing, the sacred dance dancing, the one pretending to be you so that it can know itself through your eyes, your breath, your beautiful, temporary, eternal existence. In a village in ancient Greece, in the time when philosophers still walked the dusty roads and gathered in the agora to debate the nature of truth, there lived a man named Alexios who was consumed by a single question: what is the good life? How should a human being live? Alexios was not a philosopher by training, not a scholar or a sage. He was a merchant, a man who traded in olive oil and wine, who bought and sold and traveled between coastal towns conducting his business. He was moderately successful, had a wife and 3 children, a comfortable home, enough wealth to live without constant worry. By all external measures, his life was good, and yet he was haunted by the feeling that he was missing something essential, that he was living on the surface of life rather than touching its depths. He had heard the great philosophers speak. He had listened to the Stoics talk about virtue and living according to nature, about accepting what is and not being disturbed by what is beyond one's control. He had heard the Epicureans speak of pleasure and friendship, of simple joys and freedom from fear. He had heard the followers of Socrates speak of the examined life, of questioning everything, of knowing oneself. Each teaching seemed true in its own way, yet each also seemed incomplete, partial, like one piece of a puzzle he could not quite assemble. The question tormented him. He would lie awake at night, turning it over in his mind. He would walk through the marketplace, seeing people go about their lives, the baker kneading bread, the potter shaping clay, the mother nursing her child, and wonder, do they know something I don't? Have they found the answer to how one should live? Or are they simply not asking the question? One day, Alexios heard that a renowned philosopher named Diotima had come to a nearby city. She was said to be extraordinarily wise, a woman who had taught even Socrates about the nature of love and beauty. Alexios decided he would travel to hear her speak, hoping that perhaps she could finally give him the answer he sought. He found her in a grove outside the city, sitting beneath an olive tree, surrounded by a small group of listeners. She was older than he had expected, perhaps 60, with grey hair and eyes that seemed to see through surfaces to something deeper. He joined the group and listened as she spoke. Someone had asked her about the nature of the good, about what makes a life worth living, and Diotima was saying something strange. The good life is not a destination to be reached, but a direction to be travelled. It is not a state to be achieved, but a practice to be maintained. Most people make the mistake of thinking that if they can just arrange their circumstances, correctly get enough wealth, enough pleasure, enough security, then they will have achieved the good life. But this is like thinking you can capture the wind in a jar. Alexios raised his hand. But surely, he said, there must be some way to know if we are living well or living poorly, some standard by which to measure our lives. Diotima looked at him with interest. What is your name, friend? Alexios. Tell me, Alexios, do you love your children? Of course, more than my own life. And when you are with them, when you are teaching your son to swim or listening to your daughter tell a story, are you thinking about whether this is the good life? Are you measuring the experience against some standard? Alexios paused. No, he admitted. In those moments, I am simply there, present, engaged. Exactly, Diotima said. In those moments, you are not thinking about the good life because you are living it. The question of how to live only arises when we are not fully living, when we are standing apart from our experience and judging it rather than inhabiting it. She gestured around at the grove, at the dappled sunlight filtering through the olive leaves, at the distant sound of the sea. Look at this tree. Does it ask itself how it should grow? Does it worry whether it is growing well or poorly? No, it simply grows, responding to the sun, the soil, the rain. It grows according to its nature, and in doing so, it fulfills its being. But we are not trees, someone in the group objected. We have choice, consciousness, the ability to reflect on our lives and make decisions about how to live. True, Diotima agreed, and this is both our blessing and our curse. We can reflect on our lives, but this very reflection can distance us from living them. We can think about the good life, but thinking about it is not the same as living it. In fact, excessive thinking about how to live can prevent us from actually living. Alexios felt something stirring in him, a recognition he could not quite articulate. Are you saying, he asked slowly, that the question itself is the problem? That I should stop asking how to live and just live? Not exactly, Diotima said. The question is valuable. It shows that you care, that you are not sleepwalking through existence. But the question should lead you somewhere, not trap you in endless thinking. Let me tell you a story. She settled herself more comfortably against the tree. There was once a musician who became obsessed with playing the perfect song. He would practice for hours each day, but every time he played, he would hear imperfections, mistakes, notes that were not quite right. So he would practice more, study more, refine his technique more. Years passed. He became incredibly skilled, could play pieces of astonishing technical difficulty, but he had still never played the perfect song. One day, a child came to him and asked him to play something. The musician was annoyed. He was busy practicing, but something about the child's request moved him. So he picked up his instrument and played. And as he played, something shifted. He forgot about perfection. He forgot about technique. He simply played, and the music flowed through him, and it was beautiful not because it was technically perfect, but because it was alive, present, real. When he finished, the child clapped with delight. "That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard," she said. And the musician realized that for all his years of seeking perfection, the simple, spontaneous playing for a child contained more truth, more beauty, more life than all his careful practice had ever produced. Diotima looked around at her listeners. The good life is like this. It is not achieved by perfecting some technique, by following some formula, by achieving some ideal state. It is found in moments of presence, of engagement, of forgetting yourself, and simply being alive to what is happening. Another listener spoke up. "But surely we need some guidance, some principles to live by. Otherwise, how do we know right from wrong, good from bad?" "Of course we need wisdom, need ethical principles," Diotima said, "but these should serve life, not replace it. The Stoics are right that we should cultivate virtue, accept what we cannot control, live according to reason. The Epicureans are right that pleasure and friendship and simple joys matter. Socrates is right that we should examine our lives, question our assumptions, know ourselves. But all of these teachings are fingers pointing at the moon. They point toward the good life, but they are not the good life itself." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more intimate. "Here is what I have learned in 60 years of living and 30 years of teaching. The good life is the life that is fully lived. Not perfectly lived, there is no such thing, but fully lived. It is the life where you are present to your experience rather than constantly judging it or trying to make it something other than it is. It is the life where you love deeply, work honestly, face difficulties with courage, enjoy pleasures without clinging to them, and release losses without being destroyed by them." The philosopher Aristotle, who would come along a generation later, would call this eudaimonia, human flourishing, the actualization of one's potential. But he would also say that it is not a state, but an activity, not a destination, but a way of traveling. Alexios felt tears pricking his eyes, though he could not say exactly why. "I have been so busy asking how to live," he said, "that I have forgotten to actually live. I have been treating my life as a problem to be solved rather than as an experience to be inhabited." "Yes," Diotima said gently, "this is what happens when we live too much in our heads, when we believe that thinking about life is more important than living it. The mind is a wonderful tool, but it can become a cage. It can convince us that we need to figure everything out before we can truly begin living. But life is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a dance to be danced, a song to be sung, a meal to be tasted. And you cannot do any of these things from a distance through analysis and planning. You must jump in, you must participate." "But what if I make mistakes?" someone asked. "What if I live wrongly?" "You will make mistakes," Diotima said. "This is guaranteed. You will hurt people you love. You will pursue things that do not bring you happiness. You will waste time on trivialities and miss opportunities for depth. This is part of being human. But the question is not how to avoid all mistakes. That is impossible. The question is how to live so fully, so presently, so authentically, that even your mistakes become part of your growth, part of your learning, part of the rich texture of a life well lived." She stood up, brushing leaves from her robe. "I will tell you one more thing, and then I must go. The secret of the good life is this: there is no secret. There is no hidden formula, no special knowledge that will suddenly make everything clear and easy. There is only this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment. And in each moment you have a choice to be present or absent, to engage or withdraw, to love or to close your heart, to act with integrity or to compromise yourself, to be authentic or to pretend." She looked directly at Alexios. "You asked how to live. Here is my answer. Live the way water flows, not rigidly, not by forcing, but by finding the natural path, by responding to what is, by being flexible and strong at once. Live the way a tree grows rooted in what is real, reaching toward the light, accepting storms when they come, releasing leaves when their season is done. Live the way a child plays fully absorbed, not worried about the past or future, simply here, now, alive to this moment. The great teacher Lao Tzu had written in the Tao Te Ching, in a distant land and language Diotima did not know. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. This was the wisdom she was pointing toward, that there is a way of living that is effortless, not because it requires no effort, but because it flows with the grain of reality rather than against it. After Diotima left, Alexios stayed in the grove for a long time, thinking about what she had said, and then he caught himself. He was thinking about it rather than living it. So he stood up and simply walked, paying attention to the feel of the earth beneath his feet, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the sound of birds in the trees. He did not think about whether this was the good life. He simply walked. On the journey home, he found himself seeing things differently. The sunset over the sea, he had seen thousands of sunsets, but had he ever really seen one? He stopped and watched, really watched, the way the light changed, the colors shifting, the vast beauty of it. And in that watching, there was no question about the good life. There was simply the sunset and the watching and a sense of being exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should be doing. When he arrived home, his children ran to greet him, and instead of being distracted by thoughts of business or worries about the future, he was simply there with them. He picked up his youngest daughter and spun her around, hearing her laughter, feeling the weight of her in his arms, knowing that this moment would pass, that she would grow and change and one day be too big to spin, and that this was not sad but simply true, and that the knowledge of impermanence made the moment more precious, not less. That night, as he lay beside his wife, she said, "You seem different, lighter somehow." "I think," he said slowly, "that I have been carrying a question that was too heavy, or rather, I was carrying it wrongly, as a burden instead of as a guide." "What question?" "How to live well. I thought there was an answer I needed to find, a secret I needed to learn. But I'm beginning to understand that the question itself is part of the living. It keeps me awake, keeps me attentive, keeps me from sleepwalking through my days. But it's not a question that gets answered once and for all. It's a question that gets lived, moment by moment, choice by choice." His wife was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you're learning what my grandmother used to say, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. If you bring presence and care to the small moments, then your whole life becomes present and caring. If you wait for some special time to really live, you miss the only life you actually have, the life happening right now." Alexios rolled over and looked at her face in the moonlight coming through the window. After 15 years of marriage, she could still surprise him with wisdom he had not known she possessed. Or perhaps he had simply never been present enough to hear it. "I love you," he said, and meant it more fully than he had in years. In the weeks and months that followed, Alexios did not become a different person. He still worked as a merchant, still worried about money sometimes, still lost his patience with his children, still made mistakes, but something had fundamentally shifted. He was more often present, more often awake to his life as it was happening, rather than lost in thoughts about how it should be or could be or might have been. He discovered that the good life was not something he would one day achieve, but something he could touch in any moment he was fully present. It was there when he helped his son learn to read, when he shared wine with friends, when he walked through the marketplace, when he worked on his accounts, when he made love to his wife, when he sat quietly watching the sea. It was not in special experiences, but in the quality of attention he brought to ordinary ones. And sometimes he would remember Diotima beneath the olive tree, and he would smile, grateful that she had not given him the answer he thought he wanted, but had instead pointed him toward the living of the question itself, which was the only answer there ever was or would be. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, perhaps you too can release the burden of having to figure out the good life. the right way, the perfect path. Perhaps you can simply be here, breathing, resting, allowing this moment to be enough. The good life is not somewhere else waiting for you to find it. It is here, in this breath, in this letting go, in this sweet descent into rest. Live the question, be the answer. Rest now in the only moment you ever have, which is always this one.